With that, a very good morning. A very good morning to what is now the last sort of event before closure of this sort of magnificent Croatia forum. Margus Cornaro, myself, from the European Commission, Deputy Director-General for Development Cooperation, and more specifically, over the last 3 years, I'm in charge of rolling out all of our country-based programs, and in that context also have focused a lot of energy, time and resources, in particular on the European Union response to different crises around the world, federating this with member states, but also federating that with international organizations, with civil society organizations, focusing a lot on that also in the role of the private sector, and recognizing increasingly also the role of religious leaders in all of that. Also, as large aid organization, we are ones who are very keen to work closely with the research community, and something also which I'm very happy that we are able to get into that here in this format. I very much welcome the focus and the task we were given here this morning, namely after a range of interesting interventions where we had essentially ministers, politicians being sort of at the panel, at the podium, speaking sort of amongst themselves, that we are given here the privilege and the opportunity to be sort of the practitioners and those who actually are in charge and have the responsibility to make all of that operational. And for that also, I very much like sort of the caption of the title. Yes, that we focus on pitfalls, but also that together also we see how each and every of us as development actors, as opposed to development politicians, as development actors look forward for solutions. I would very much hope that we are in a position to leave the forum and ourselves with quite a few additional insights on what works, and in explaining what works, also to understand better why other things maybe work less. The group here this morning, gathering colleagues from the public side, gathering colleagues from international organizations, from the private sector, religious leaders, civil society organizations, and research really does give us the possibility, I hope, to look at these themes from really various angles. And I would like to each and every one to be as specific, outspoken, and also questionable as we try to think a bit out of the box. The privilege of being able to think out of the box here is because the box was given to us by the politicians. If it wasn't for their boxes, it would be difficult to think out of the boxes. But this is very much the format in which I think we should be able to try to do so. I would maybe then at some stage also happily come back and bring in a bit where we stand as European Commission in some of the ideas on notably conflict prevention and the various tools we are about to elaborate. That also we look at how we coordinate with some of the international actors in various formats, and also some of the work we're doing collectively on addressing fragility and helping countries in fragility overcoming crisis. And then also quite happy to share later on some of the ideas we are developing on results frameworks, and particularly if it comes to results frameworks in accounting for work we're doing in difficult situations. And where also some of the improvements invariably backslide. As the very good background paper highlights we were given, where we are reminded that countries who have experienced violence in the last 20 years are those countries which systematically have a 20% higher incident of poverty, and also the worrisome figure given here that about of the 40% of countries coming out of violence in 10 years return back to problems, unless also, like partly here in the region, this is being well addressed through integration frameworks. So the challenges are daunting, but here together we all sort of have tried to make better use, more innovative use, and more responsive use of development cooperation as actors. And in that also, I was listening with interest yesterday's discussion of the first panel, where the opening bid by the DAC chairman was a very upbeat notion on the improvements we had heard in development cooperation. But I think it was well picked up by some of the other speakers that this falls short of some of the remaining challenges, notably for countries experience consistent crisis fragility, but also, and maybe we can address this, that the growing income disparity within countries remains something which first each and every public institution of a country needs to address, but also where we have to be very aware as development actors that this is a tremendous unfinished agenda, needing a combination of international advocacy and action, but also a stronger focus on domestic public accountability on many things which we are doing. And I've also liked to have heard the minister speak the day before on the risk of development cynicism, which I think is a nice word coming out of a country like Croatia, being aware that if we don't properly address the underlying motives of development cooperation, this may turn quickly the support we still feel and get in Europe, at least on development, into the usual stereotypical notions of this is only serving anyway contractors from those who put public money into that, be it technical expertise or companies, and or worse, even that all of that goes into sort of corrupt, bad holes and practices. And again, here in the European Commission, this is one of my prime tasks, is that at least to what we put forward as European Union grant funding is being able to be accountable, but not just in terms of accountancy of where the euro sort of actually was traced, but also in terms of results. So for all of that, also I'm very much looking forward to hear from each and every one of you how this feeds in, and I'm looking forward to a very interesting discussion, which I would like to ask the Assistant Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mrs. Vesna Batistić, to kick off. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Markus, and it is really a pleasure to be part of this roundtable. As you said, we had 2 days of strategic discussions where we are going, what is the direction in new global development agenda. And today we have a chance to see it a little bit from the operational level and to speak on how we are doing this and what are the methods and models that are working and that can be applied. Yet again, taking into account that on Croatian direction in development cooperation, we already heard President and Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister. It's very difficult for me to say something that will be extremely surprising. But I will try to just remind us that, or maybe just start with what you have finished with the notion of development cynicism and with the fact that that was said by a Croatian minister. We understand development cynicism maybe better than those who are much longer in this business because we were recipient since yesterday. We were recipient and we worked with donors from the other side. And that is a specific experience that not really everybody in European Union has or can remember. And we had to work with donors that, insisted to, or they were offering projects that we really didn't need. We had to work around what was offered and try to somehow adjust it to our own needs. And that was really since 2 years ago. So that is a fresh experience, and that is to a certain extent something that we also bring to the European development agenda. And then we jumped from this recipient status overnight in European Union into the membership of the European Union, who is, we know all that, the biggest international, the biggest donor in the world. And overnight we were asked to fulfill commitments that the European Union has in terms of development cooperation. So from recipient, we were in 0.7 requirement club. And that is difficult to do. And this is why we're asking, well, today we have in so-called informal EU13 in the European Union, that the countries that joined in the last 15 years, that most of them are in similar situation. And we are actually downsizing the collective European Union aid, the official development assistance. And we actually, well, we are not starting from scratch, but are far away from having capacity to deal overnight with all the requirements, not only in quantitative terms, but also in capacity building terms that the clubs are requiring. So what is the added value, what we can bring? For Croatia, we've heard it several times already here. Everyone would typically say we are small and we are new donor. What that means? Are we that small and that new as is typically taught? New. We had some experience from before war experience that the ties that we had with Asian and African countries are still alive. There was a common feature to have students from these countries on scholarship. The Prime Minister mentioned that during the 90s, even if Croatia was itself in war and torn apart and suffering serious atrocities, we have accepted refugees from the neighboring countries. We worked with countries in the region during the war and after the war today as well. Region is our most important development partner. So we are not entirely new. We are small in volume, that is clear, in terms of percentage and in terms of total numbers. Because we are small in volume, we have to be prudent in spending. So we have to choose very well, we have to assess. We cannot afford, as Minister said, that projects are not successful. So typically we will go locally. We'll try to develop a local community somewhere, whether this is Afghanistan or Myanmar. We will work locally, we will be very close with local community, and we will listen to their needs. But then we have to give them then something that we are good at, or better than others, or something that we have and nobody who is coming with much bigger funds actually does not. So we have our experience, and experience, we're talking over and over again of what does that mean, the experience, the post-conflict experience, the transitional experience, various forms of policies that we have tried on our own and that worked or didn't work. And that's the real added value that new member states of the European Union actually can bring to this agenda. The only problem with the experience is that we, in order to share it, really first must know what it is. What is that we are sharing? It is clear that policies cannot be applied automatically from one country to another country. Then experience is something that evaporates very quickly. If 20 years ago we had some experience with, or 10 years ago with demilitarization or with peaceful reintegration, people who are actually doing this, it's already now it's difficult to find them. And in 20 years they will not be around. So where we need to work together indeed in partnership within European Union and then outside is to figure out how to turn this experience into knowledge, into how to institutionalize it, how to systematize it. Then we will have a proper models, proper results that will be potentially applicable in other places, and then that will be prone to adjust to other places' circumstances. And coming from that perspective, we managed to do this, and I'm actually this round table somehow hopefully will bring these concrete experiences, and then we'll have another step in making this knowledge solid and possible to use. Then we will also be in a better position to approach partner states from real partnership angle, because we are offering something that we have experienced ourselves and that make us equal, and that changes the perspective of classical donor-recipient relationship that we are now trying to change in this new paradigm. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vesna, for quite a few very good pointers, notably on how to build on experience and turn that into systematic knowledge, but also the good combination to which I think we would hopefully come back to, and on combining sort of the global agenda with a more localized approach, and certainly on the prudence of spending, we will come back to on a number of fronts. But with that, I'm very happy to pass the floor or the microphone to the Assistant Minister Bojan Glavašević from the Minister of Veterans Affairs. Please.
Thank you so much. Dear representatives of religious communities and NGOs, dear Excellencies, esteemed colleagues, guests and friends, Mr. Minister, sitting here today in the lovely Dubrovnik and talking about these truly pressing issues, I think that before I begin talking about the law on victims of sexual violence, which is I think we are very proud of, I would just like to turn your attention for a brief moment to the fact that while we are here, a bit further away in Srebrenica, there is a commemoration of the biggest disgrace in humanity's most recent history, and I think that it creates an obligation for us that what we speak about today, we turn into something that will give effect, not just remain words. But I'm sure that all of you already have that in mind. With that said, actually the Ministry of Veterans Affairs, perhaps a brief explanation for those of you who do not know what we work with. The Ministry of Veterans Affairs of Croatia works with about 500,000 of veterans from the homeland war, and also about 1 million of members of their families. So it is, in our care we have about a quarter or a bit less than a quarter of Croatia's population, which means that at least every fourth citizen of Croatia was in some manner touched by the war. And 20 years after the war, the Ministry of Veterans Affairs wrote a law on victims, or rather survivors of sexual violence in the homeland war. This issue was raised at one point in the Croatian parliament. Why do we separate victims of sexual violence from other civil victims of war, since survivors of sexual violence are one category of civil victims of war? And the reason for that is that sexual violence is, apart from being especially heinous, an especially heinous form of atrocities in war, it is also something that in the 21st century we believe firmly that we can end it, much like cannibalism at one point was common in human history during wars, and then it was ended. We believe that if we made the effort, that we can actually end sexual violence in the future. And this law was one small contribution to that. This law was written in cooperation with our partners from the UNDP, also with incredible support from our Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ms. Pusic. She was an incredible support in the whole process. One of the most important ideas when we were writing the law was the idea that we need to separate the prosecution of perpetrators from the process of granting benefits to survivors. Because sexual violence often does not leave a trace, a visible one at least. But some wounds are visible, like when a veteran loses an arm or a leg. It is obvious, but some wounds from some crimes do not leave a visible trace. Sexual violence is often such. So the victims, apart from surviving a horrible trauma, they are often forced to prove and that they went through this, and they're often disbelieved. So the decision was to separate these two processes, because until this point the victims needed a convicting sentence of the perpetrator in order to be granted benefits. So we said we want to make this law a law for the victims and to separate the perpetrators. We also wanted to take into account the fact that most victims, the vast majority of victims of sexual violence, are women. So this law had to be a law that was written by women for women. The working group, the task force which was tasked with writing the law, was actually made of, I think 80% of the members were women. So we wanted this law written by women for women. Of course, this does not mean that male victims of sexual violence are any less represented, and in fact, the UNDP helped us finance a very serious study which gave us an estimate of the number of victims of sexual violence in the homeland war. The study is a very innovative piece of science, I would say, and it correlated vast amounts of data, which helped us get an estimation of the number of victims. You have to understand that 20 years after the war, and in a system which failed to prosecute a lot of the perpetrators. I will just give you an example that in Croatia, since the homeland war, there was less than 20 convictions of perpetrators. So, because a lot of cases were reported but not prosecuted. And also, and this is not something that we are very proud of, but at some points in our history, in the early 90s especially, the State Attorney's Office was not able to prosecute perpetrators even when we had when they admitted to committing the crimes. So, taking all of this into account, the study gave us an estimate that there were in Croatia from 1,500 to 2,500 victims of sexual violence, both men and women. A vast majority of victims were survived sexual violence in Serbian concentration camps, mostly outside of Croatian territory, but some also within borders of Croatia. A small amount, much smaller amount of crimes were committed by Croatian forces in the period between 1994 and 1995, but the vast majority were committed in 1991 and 1992. In the study, we also asked the victims what do they think would be a good way of achieving restitution. What would be a good, so to speak, benefits package? What would help them? We didn't want to make the mistake of having the work group think of measures that would be good for victims. We wanted to ask the victims themselves. So all the measures in the law were actually proposed by survivors themselves. This law was also, we wanted this to be a piece of legislation which represents a kind of continuity of what was done so far. So this law is in accordance with many acts that came before it, like UNHCR 1325, Istanbul Declaration, and also EU Directive 2012/29/EU on minimum standards in law and protection for victims of crimes. Many other acts as well, but these are the most notable ones. From its inception, we wanted to turn this law, we wanted it to become, in a way, the heritage of the world. We did not want this law to be just something that will remain within Croatia's borders. It was not easy to write this law. It was not easy to pass this law. Even in the 21st century, we had to fight for it. In Parliament, an example, some people thought and said this, that it was impossible for members of the Croatian army to be perpetrators of crimes, and even with actual convictions of members of Croatian army. Some of the people were convicted for war crimes. Croatia did do its job in the second half of the 90s. So even with this, we had to fight for it. And once we had it, we wanted it to be a testimony to our commitment of, actually ending sexual violence. And from it, now that we have it, and we just recently, the minister signed the bylaws, and we will start a campaign which we hope will entice victims and survivors to approach us and to ask for benefits. What this law can give to the world, what Croatia can give. Well, the law itself, we think it's a very good law. Of course, in the future, we hope that we will have better laws in other countries, but other countries that struggle with the process of creating such laws could benefit from actually having something that works, at least in Croatia, modify it to their own needs. And of course, we would be very happy to help them in the process. Also, the experience of writing it and passing it, sort of the troubleshooting, we can help with that. And since this law is integrated into the Croatian psychosocial welfare system for veterans and for civil victims of war, our models and our expertise in psychosocial welfare could be useful to other countries that are facing similar problems as us. In 20 years since the war, of course, Croatia had successes and we had some failures. It was not easy, it was not perfect, but The process got us to where we are today. Recently, a few months ago, the minister presented what we did in New York in the United Nations, most notably to the Deputy Executive Director of UN Women. And this was received with much enthusiasm, I'm happy to say. We are also happy to present this to anyone who might be interested. So without going into much detail, because 6 minutes is, although very objective frame, it is sadly not enough to give you all the ins and outs of what we did with this law. So I would be happy to answer any questions now or later about this. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Bojan. I mean, I must admit I've read a bit about the law, but I'm even more impressed now from hearing you present it in the broader context. I think it's really a remarkable contribution. Coming back also to what Vesna said, of also sort of a smaller country can pioneer legislation, and I think it would be good to come back to some of the details, notably the type of measures which are the ones the victims thought are useful. For me, also listening to you, it spans the big problem we always face between fighting impunity in post-conflict versus reconciliatory measures. But I also do think this is one of the areas where one should be tight in fighting impunity, and notably recognizing a specific vulnerability of a subsector well, not subsector, sort of a segment of society, similarly as the work being done to roll back the children soldiers, for instance, and related aspects. And I'm also happy to come back to some ideas where I would be happy if Croatia's very good example, for instance, would find its way into the role we're doing in the International Alliance on Fragile and Conflict States, where a number of peace-building goals notably try to address the good balance between impunity and reconciliation and refer to that specific law. But with that, I have now the pleasure also to go sort of outside of the immediate neighborhood and welcome that we have here with us the head of the Europe Department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Iraq, Mrs. Safia Taleb. And very good, I think, to hear also from how a sort of a troubled country, if I may say so, is addressing some of the issues here at hand. Please, you've got the microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, and I would like to start with greeting all of you. I don't know if my embassy did provide you with my CV, so if you don't mind, I would like to... I'm the first Iraqi ambassador in my country, Ambassador Safia al-Suhail. I have been working for so long to my country. I've been for the past 8 years a member of parliament and a member of Foreign Relations Committee. Prior to that, I was a political activist, and I did vote for the democracy for my country. So I'm sorry if I was picked wrongly here, but I mean, civil society and development is, of course, part of what we are doing. But if you allow me really to start what I have prepared to say in this forum. Again, I would like to express my profound gratitude to Croatian government, and in particular to Her Excellency, Madam Vesna, for inviting Iraq for this very important forum. I would also ask to, I would like also to thank you all for your excellent hospitality and very successful organization. And you know, Iraq, my country, is in a war with one of the most evil barbarian terrorists, a group that the history has witnessed. They are carrying out tremendous crimes, cruels against all communities in Iraq, against the humanity and our common identity, against collective memory and culture heritage, as you all know. I think that all their crimes are today very well documented and widely screened through social media, digital technology, and using Hollywood methods, as you have seen. And the topic of our panel, Lessons Learned, Pitfalls, and Solution, I would like to concentrate here on Daesh, ISIL, or known as ISIS. Dear friends, Ba'ath, Al-Qaeda, and Daesh are three major pitfalls, dangers that the Iraqi society face in the last 5 decades, with horrendous consequences of my people. Iraq neighbors, Iran and Kuwait, internationally known as Gulf War, and internally as a genocide, against the Iraqi people, sanctions, occupation, sectarian violence, and terrorism, an industry of pain, suffering, tears, injustice, and hatred created in the country with spillover effects. I think the lesson that we have to learn here, if the regional and the international community would have stopped Saddam Hussein regime to commit a genocide against his people and stopped his wars timely, collectively, and efficiently, we would have not seen Al-Qaeda arriving Iraq or Daesh to appear later, which is much bigger and more dangerous and savage threat today of all of us. And if we do not do more together today, we might get more dangerous groups and threats than these current terrorists. Daesh are coming today from about 100 countries, but they might be increased in both their numbers and numbers of countries that they are come from. Certainly, we could have avoided the fall of our terror authorities to these terrorists if we could have all done our homework better in our country, and also if the international community were more attentive, active, and cooperative against these thugs and terrorists. Now, if we want all to eliminate this cancer of Daesh from our body, we need to intensify our cooperation and act more rapidly and timely to coordinate them, to eliminate them. We need to address the root causes of it and address also other aspects of this fight against them, which is intellectually, culture, religious, education, economic, social, financial, and technology, in addition to military and security and intelligent aspects of this fight. As Daesh are interrelated and interdependent, we should be much better related and work more together to enhance and develop our cooperation on all levels. Now, what Europe and the international community can do to eliminate Daesh. First, I do personally believe that parliaments of Europe and beyond needs, in accordance with human rights principles, freedoms of expression, and the fundamental freedoms and rights, to issue anti-terror legislations and to monitor better the application of social media, in particular when it comes to recruitment of terrorists, hate speech, encouragement of violence, denial of others' rights and the other rights and rights to exist. Front yards, airports, train stations, ports, bus stations, and other borders. Gates need to be controlled better. I think what we need to see is harder punishment to be applied against terrorists and those involved in terrorism to be used. Sorry to tell you that terrorists are not afraid to end up in Europe 5-star prisons, and they are not really, as we all know, facing death penalty. I'm not encouraging death penalty at all, but this is what I'm trying to explain. The European measures are too soft for them. There is a need to hit them harder in one hand, and in the other hand, fighting the Islamophobia and xenophobia, fighting hatred and racism on the other hand. Dear friends, Daesh is an important factor in feeding and fostering extremist groups and movements worldwide. We need all in our country to concentrate more on peace education, peace building, including more role for women in that regard, which is often neglected, and especially in the Middle East. We need to pay attention for more tolerance, accepting the others, accepting the other different of us, respect and management of the diversity, and cherishing it. I think that nonviolence methods of solving conflicts, reconciliation, social harmony and cohesion, and nonviolent methods should be disseminated through more at our schools, university, mosques, and other religious institutions, and media, and etc. My modest experience tells me that beside military and security measures, teaching, preaching, and curriculum are most important issues to be reformed in winning the fight in both Islamic world and in the world as a whole. Enhancement of good governance, social justice, rule of law, inclusive citizenship, embracement of diversity knowledge are the best remedies and answers. My country, Iraq, is grateful to all those who stood with us against the dictatorship in the past and now in supporting us in our fight against Daesh. Our success, I believe, it's your success, and our failure is your failure. We have no other choice, Iraq extending its hand to all of you. Government, civil society, international organization, to develop further our relation and cooperate against terrorism of Daesh and on many other aspects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Safia, for this impressive account of where your country currently stands. And yes, your CV is very impressive, and this is why I said, rather than me to sort of summarize where each and everyone is coming for you, please continue also the good example of Safia to pick those parts of the CV which are relevant to the discussion. In fact, you were very humble in saying what you had done. I mean, you're known for having already alerted Tony Blair early in the I think 2002, 2003. Of the problems in Iraq, and you were at the European Parliament and also at the UN, and were critical, one of the first critical voices of the slow response. And this matches also your current analysis that we have with Iraq. Certainly a good example here in the room of the cost of opportunities lost if we were not to react quickly. Certainly some of the other aspects, notably the reform of, as you say, teaching and preaching, is something which stands sort of out in that forum. We already heard quite a few others sort of put a finger on education as a tool, including education like in refugee camps early, to make sure that we don't lose sight of yet another generation. I think the point was made by Margaret Malmström yesterday, saying or quoting that UNHCR was broke. Anyway, this is sort of more the broader funding aspect. On Daesh itself, we all yet to struggle how to come best to grips with that phenomenon, and certainly we'll hear from others here around the table. On that dimension of terrorism. Also in Europe, there's big discussions on how to update terrorist legislation, anti-terrorist legislation. with the difficulty also what to do with returning Europeans, whether there should be still a sort of a bridge for reintegration or harsh punishment, and this is something where one would need to find the balance. Otherwise, in terms of overall work on conflict prevention, this brings us also into a lot of work done by Europe, but also by other actors on countering violent extremism, as it's now called, the CVE type brand, sort of a new acronym creeping into the development agenda, CVE, on how to use some of the programs in concrete terms, which also means, among many others, picking up what Vesna said, the need to go local and to really work with local religious and teaching communities to understand how to pass messages and how to modernize messages. But it's also quite a daunting challenge for the academia to come in as we try to understand, say, for instance, in the Sahel, what are really the big forces fueling terrorist activities. So many thanks for leaving very potent messages here in the room. With that, I would pass the microphone to Ms. Gordana Garašić, Brigadier General, bringing in also the human aspect of the military dimension, I guess, to the debate. But anything else you want to contribute? But anyway, you've got the microphone, Gordana.
Thank you very much. My greetings to all distinguished participants, and it's really honored to be here today. Thank you for inviting me. Yes, we in uniform, we are also human. And when speaking about conflicts, and I believe we will speak about conflicts the whole day because it's all connected, I have to tell you that you all know that conflicts have different consequences or influence on women, men, girls, and boys. And it took us some time to officially, I would say, recognize that by passing UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. And today, 15 years later, what we in armed forces did, actually we are integrating, how we call it, gender perspective in the armed forces, and especially during conducting peacekeeping or crisis response operations, or actually very simply while providing security assistance. And what I'm going to share today with you, it's my experience not from Croatian armed forces, it's experience when I was serving as part of the NATO mission in Afghanistan as gender advisor for the commander of Security Assistance Force last year. It has a very nice title, gender advisor, so many people even there were asking me, what are you really doing? So what is your job there? Actually, as part of the NATO mission there, we had in mandate that we need to work with security forces and institutions, meaning Ministry of Interior and Ministry of Defense, to integrate more women in security forces and institutions. Why is that important? It's important because women constitute, in that country, and I believe in most of the countries in the world, 50% of the population. So if you don't have 50% of the population involved in security, actually you are denying basic human rights to them. There's no development in such countries. There's no what we are talking about today, sustainable development. So I used to quote State Secretary Kerry, who actually very nicely described it. If you leave 50% of your team on the bench, you cannot win. So you cannot win the war, you cannot win in any conflict, and you cannot develop yourself if you don't use all human capital you have. What we did actually there from internally, it has been proven that integration of women in security forces, and by that in the society overall, has proven, military language speaking, that we are more operationally effective, meaning that we are talking also to women from the other side, from local population, where we come to help and to assist. And it's also very directly connected to success of the mission. What we did actually when I got there, I got my mandate, so we had to provide some kind of action plan. What are we going really to do to prove my commander that I will be useful to his mission and to success of the mission? So we draw together the action plan, which actually included similar tasks for us, but also our target audience and people, organization with whom we really needed to work with were not just Afghan Ministry of Interior and Defense, but we also had to work very closely with civil society, NGOs, all other international actors, meaning different international organizations, and embassies also. Because why? All of them were working something on gender, and of course, we were not sharing information, so it happened sometimes that actually you have, and money is involved in that business too. So you are funding the same projects from few different organizations or NGOs, and at the end, you don't have the result. And of course, ISAF as a military mission was criticized that we are not sharing our data and we are not too much open to international organizations, so we decided to change that, because we really have nothing to hide. We all have the same mandate, same goal to have human rights to be respected, to fight for these basic human rights and basic security and freedom, which is prerequisite, as you all know, for development and security. So we actually established 3 main outcomes that we want to accomplish. And of course, these outcomes cannot be accomplished in a year or 2. It will take some time, it will take some work, and it's not going to be easy. But I believe that we were setting the foundations for a good fora for future who will come to develop it. So mainly in security forces, we decided together with our Afghan counterparts, because they were drawing the plan with our advice, as Assistant Minister said, what they need, not what we think that they would need to get there, because actually they draw very good plans and policies stating that they want to have 10% of women in military and police. So that was their goal and that was their plan. And the first thing was that we saw the plans are good, but implementation is lacking. So we need to work on buy-in from their leadership and from our leadership to work on this, to implement it. The second thing is, when you speak operationally in that area, of course, you need to work on some projects in order to provide safe working and training environments, because this is still the issue, to be safe when you are going to work, when you are working, or when you are trained. So the projects including building facilities, as I was usually saying, everything comes back to the toilets, because if you don't have proper facilities in certain barracks, women cannot work there. If you don't have childcare facilities, of course, women will not be working there. So you have to think about some things which I really didn't think before I get there. And the last thing that is really unfortunate is still the issue, it's sexual and gender-based violence, including in security forces. So these are 3 main outcomes, which are kind of big umbrellas for many, many things to be done, in order to have efficient security force who can provide security for their population. That's the main meaning and the main whole of it. So how it is connected all together, it is connected. We did many of the projects, but we were not involved before that in being a project manager, dealing with money directly. We were part of the mission. But then US Congress decided to earmark no less than $25 million for recruitment, training, and promotion of women in Afghan security forces. And then NATO and a trust fund decided to also grant us $10 million for the same purpose. So overnight, we became the project manager. I had a nightmare, what is on budget, what is off budget, how are we going to track it, who is going to be accountable. Yes, and we write reports to US Congress, how we are spending US dollars. So it was very interesting change from just being advisor to being a project manager, to work very closely with your, how I would call it, target audience, with my friends from ministries from Afghan side. But it was really a very nice experience, very challenging one, because we found ourselves together with different embassies, UN and EU, UPOL mission, with whom we worked very closely. And by the way, we discovered that they were financing European Commission, the same thing that NATO did. So we decided to divide a little bit. Thanks. So yeah, we opened the door, and especially Canadian ambassador, she was really active, and I call her, she's my general in diplomatic circles, because she was giving missions to different ambassadors, what they need to accomplish, to whom they have to talk in Afghan government. And I have to tell you that we also had few very good meetings with Mrs. Ghani, which is also a change in that country because she decided to have her own office to work on portfolio of human rights. And one day she actually invited everybody from international community who is dealing something with female police. She wanted to hear, she organized a round table like this one, and she wanted to hear who is doing what in order to synchronize the efforts. Because one of the things that we were facing there was duplication of efforts, and everybody are downsizing their personnel, downsizing the funds. And actually that was the reason why everybody understood finally that we need to exchange information, that we need to coordinate efforts. Doesn't matter if you are military, diplomat, if you are coming from NGO or Afghan civil society. So at the end, actually, I left really sad because I'm leaving at the key moment, but I also left really happy because I believe that we push some things forward. And if you look at a country whose population, I think around 70% of population is younger than 25, and currently around 9 million boys and girls are going to school, it's a huge potential. And I have to tell you that all young people with whom I talk to, men and women working together in MOI, Ministry of Interior and Defense, they all want a stable country, they all want to work, and they all want, you know, better future. So I believe those are good foundations that we need to build on, and it could be a good example. Of course, it will not happen tomorrow. We still have to think about security. So very oftenly I had to argue that my topic is really important in the meetings in the HQ, while we had also a security issue. Can you go out from the base to have a meeting in Ministry of Interior without any threats or no? So yes, it's the reality, but on the other side, it's really promising, and I believe that we all need to work harder and coordinate ourselves better in order to, and as Assistant Minister said, to ask actually people to who we want to help what they really need, and then shape it, fund it, and somehow control it in order, not control it on a bad way, but just because of accountability. At the end, I would say, speaking of gender portfolio, that even NATO and some other organizations put together a very ambitious action plan on implementing policy on women, peace and security, and how far we went, even in our countries, says the first outcome from this plan that we still need to work to remove the barriers for active and meaningful participation of women in security forces. Not just in countries where we come to help, but in our own countries. So, as Ms. Safia said, we still have to work together, but the key point is active and meaningful participation and inclusion of everybody, of whole human capital, so inclusion of other 50% in the society in order to reach sustainable development. Thank you.
No, thanks a lot, Gordana, for what again is a very, very visible side of the sort of the human aspect and of the military. Something which is luckily increasingly understood, but there's still quite a long road to go. It also echoes part of the things you said, the wider European and international debate on the link between security and development, and within security and development. The remaining question to what extent development funding, ODA funding, should underpin exactly the type of operations you were being tasked. It's something which is currently also on the table of the European Union Council, and also on my desk to see how we can frame together with the External Action Service a line. A lot of what you describe, but that's similar in other conflict places, whether it's the European Union training mission in Mali or whether it's the one in Somalia, where there's sort of the gap on reaching out to the military and police, sort of the security forces of sort of troubled countries. I personally believe that this is a gap which has to be closed one way or the other. It's a missing link of many opportunities. I think in this case, Afghanistan, we're lucky to have someone like yourself. With coming in with a good mandate on gender, but then also the energy to get a few things going, backed by U.S. Congress appropriations. But again, the question is open: should these appropriations come out of sort of a defense budget, or should they come out of a development budget? And for that, the verdict is still open. But it's certainly what you described to me is a very good example that one should look at the military or not military in development should be linked to the activities they carry out. So you should look actually at the objective of what is being done rather than of the vehicle or the instrument. So this is at least the discourse we're currently having. But it's rightly so a new phenomenon. It's something which is not fully addressed yet with a strong international consensus. Also not yet in the Development Assistance Committee in DAC, where also there's currently a reflection ongoing whether international support to peacekeeping operations should be what they call sort of DACable, could be sort of pegged against ODA contributions, and not just the quite impressive funding coming from the European Union to a lot of the African peace operations, about $1 billion altogether over the last two or three years, but also the DPKO operations, the UN. But anyway, I think it would be good to come back to that. I mean, certainly the way this puts sort of gender, education, the inclusiveness on youth, and like in Afghan, 50% of the female society very much on the agenda of what is a very concrete lessons learned. Otherwise, you sort of waste not a lot of man and women power in a place like Kabul, but also would be beside the objective. This sort of now sort of concludes the first four very useful, very enriching contributions we heard sort of from the institutional side, allowing me sort of starting off with Terence Pike, the UNHCR representative here in Croatia, to hear from sort of altogether 4 different voices from international organizations. And with that, Terence, you've got the microphone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and special thanks for the invitation to this roundtable discussion. I would like to begin, first of all, by talking about the facts and figures for displacement, global displacement. It's hard for UNHCR not to mention this. And to begin with, I start by informing you that almost 60 million people have been forcibly displaced as of 2015. And if this was a country, it would be the 24th largest country in the world. By the end of 2014, there were 19.5 million refugees, and that number continues to rise every day. In 2014, 42,500 persons per day fled their homes, fleeing war, conflict, and persecution. And the interesting thing here is that the developing countries host 86% of the world's refugees, contrary to what others may think. And this number has increased from 10 years ago, where it was 70%. Turkey has taken over from Pakistan, where they host the largest number of refugees. These are Afghans, and the figure now is almost 2 million. 51% of refugees are under the age of 18. This presents huge challenges with regard to education, health, and psychosocial support. And by the end of 2014, UNHCR assisted 46.7 million persons. In addition to this, you have 32.8 million internally displaced persons, of which 7.6 million at the end of 2014 were in Syria. We also see asylum figures, and this is linked to the mixed migration movements that we see every day unfolding on television. people fleeing from Libya and elsewhere crossing the Mediterranean in search of safety and security. 1.66 million applications in 2015. This is a phenomenal figure. Russia, incidentally, hosts the largest number of asylum applications, followed by Germany and the United States. Now, I think, as you mentioned yourself, UNHCR is running short of money. Our budget is almost $6 billion. This is a huge, huge amount of money to raise, which comes from voluntary contributions, public and private sector fundraising. I have worked in several conflict and post-conflict countries, and as you may be aware, UNHCR is not a development agency, but we bridge the gap between humanitarian assistance and development. And to be able to do that, we have come up with a tool called the 4 Rs. That is repatriation, reintegration, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. Just to give you some examples, Croatia, for example, is involved in a return of people that were displaced by the conflict between 1991 and 1995. And we have what we call a comprehensive solution strategy to try and assist those returning to rebuild their lives. Within this process, we have something called a regional housing program, which assists persons who lost their properties and satisfy what we call a vulnerable criteria to be able to regain housing. This in itself is not a durable solution, but it does assist in helping to rebuild one's life. I have had the privilege of working in Mozambique after the peace agreement that was signed in 1992, where UNHCR was involved in something called quick impact projects. That was to assist areas that had been devastated by the war to reconstruct clinics, schools, community centers, so that people, upon return, are able to access these services, and thereafter the longer-term development actors would then come in and introduce sustainable development programs. I've also worked in South Sudan, and in this particular context, I remember after the signing of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement in 2005, we were all very optimistic that South Sudan would be a success story, but unfortunately, as we all know, and it's said here that 40% of countries slide back into civil war. South Sudan is one such example. We also, in assisting and looking at peaceful coexistence projects, have developed something we call age, gender, and diversity programming. This is done on the basis of what is called a participatory assessment. These are the practical tools that we use to address conflicts between different refugee groups. And the participatory assessment is a tool that involves sitting down with refugees and discussing directly with them the challenges that they face, and for them to come up with the solutions on how best to address these challenges. It's a rights-based and community-based approach, And just to give you an example, we've heard about sexual and gender-based violence in conflict situations. I worked in Dadaab in Kenya, and we had huge challenges with women being raped as they looked for firewood. This phenomena was very difficult to deal with because we were not able to bring the perpetrators to justice. However, through this participatory approach, we learned from the refugees themselves that we could design a stove, a very simple instrument that would reduce the need for them to go out into the bush and to gather firewood so that they can prepare meals for the family. And once the stove had been produced, it actually reduced considerably the number of women that would be sexually abused as they went out to gather firewood. So there are some simple solutions, and as I say, this is community-based. They tell you what needs to be done. And for us, this tool has become an extremely important one, and we don't only use it in situations of camp-based activities, but also within the urban context as well. Here in Croatia, for children in Vukovar who were affected by the war, we developed a program, a project together with Europa House, an NGO, civil society who knows the situation very well, to be able to foster reconciliation and peaceful coexistence with children in Vukovar. And that project did achieve some success, but unfortunately, due to funding constraints, could not be continued. I'm happy later on in the discussion to go back to talk more in detail about other areas of the 4 Rs that I mentioned earlier, and also to see what it is that we do in trying to resolve conflicts and to foster peaceful coexistence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Terence. I mean, not just for the impressive numbers you point to, and saying that really what is currently the international debate on asylum seekers and refugees is only the tip of the iceberg, and the brunt is being carried by developing countries. I think we've also heard very clearly the resonance of anything which is operational, practical. It only works if it's down to listening to the beneficiaries first, whether it was what you heard from Vesna, the work you did on the law, Iraq, the work on gender, and yourselves. And certainly it's very good to come back then on how best to link the humanitarian, more emergency aid with development funding in terms of which is also linked to what extent one spends time on frameworks, accountability versus quick impacts. So we need to see that. I also just wanted to share with you a look at the clock. It's about we're taking about double the time for presentations. None of what we have heard would be something I would not like to have heard, which is also fine. I think we have the time, but if we continue at that rhythm of 10-12 minutes per discussant, we will not have much time for discussions. Anyway, this is rich and a bit in your hands, so I will not start interrupting each and every one, but we have sort of now the first 5 comments taking about an hour time. All of them very rich and setting a very good tone. But I'm also in your hands on that. With that, I think it would be good to hear from Elena Panova, UNDP Istanbul Regional Center.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me first thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to share UNDP's experience in partnering with some of the countries in this region in the efforts to become and emerge as new and effective donors. I think most of you are aware that UNDP, as one of the largest UN development networks, has a unique role to play in supporting the governments and has an experience in supporting the governments both in their role as recipients, but also in their role as new emerging donors. I myself, I am Bulgarian, and I've been working for UNDP Bulgaria while we were receiving donor assistance, and now in my role, working for the regional hub of UNDP, we are supporting many of these countries in the region in becoming new donors. And Turkey, for example, in point, where Turkey is still receiving international assistance, but Turkey is also, and UNDP is supporting the Turkish government and working closely with TICA, with the Development Agency of Turkey, in shaping up their strategy towards supporting the least developed countries. So in my remarks, I will try to focus on the rationale, the lessons learned, and also I will give some practical examples of this cooperation between UNDP and some of the governments in the region. So in our view, the main contribution, and it has been mentioned many times yesterday, and we've heard it today as well, the main contribution of the new emerging donors is sharing experience and expertise, and we call it East-East cooperation, which is, basically the analog of South-South cooperation, but for this region. And this is especially important for this region because most of the countries, as you all know, are middle-income countries, and in these countries, the majority of the development work is funded by the national government. So all these countries have a lot to share. And they also, have this unique experience of being a recipient and now, being a donor. And a lot of hard-won knowledge and expertise in the transition process itself, which many of them have, formed or have shaped in the form of East-East cooperation as a key element of their development assistance. So sharing knowledge in a long term, we believe can be much more effective response to the region's challenges than the traditional aid. Because the traditional aid often comes with, and it was admitted yesterday and today as well, as with imposed and also unworkable models in most of the cases. The Bulgarian Minister of Foreign Affairs also yesterday very clearly mentioned that expertise in the exchange is in many cases much more valuable, than the money which are received if these money are not used and they don't go where they need to go and not used efficiently. So let me give very briefly a few examples of we believe, successful partnership between UNDP and some of the governments in the region. For example, with the Slovak government, and Slovak government is one of the governments that provided extensive support to the reforms and the EU integration process to the Western Balkans specifically, since the very beginning of the Slovak official development assistance. And part of this support to the Western Balkan countries actually went through the Slovak UNDP Trust Fund that was established, where the UNDP country offices present in the countries in the Western Balkans basically facilitated direct face-to-face learning between the governments and the civil society. Another example of a long-term programmatic approach to knowledge and experience, again shared by the Slovak government, is the multi-year program, which is public finance for development or strengthening the capacities, the finance capacities in the Western Balkan countries, which received actually a positive assessment by the OECD DAC special review recently. In Hungary, UNDP has been proud to support a set of knowledge-sharing activities specifically on Roma inclusion. again funded via UNDP Hungary Trust Fund, which was a joint project between the Hungary Ministry of Foreign Affairs and UNDP, and was operational between 2004 and 2013. With Romania, we have a very successful and still ongoing partnership, where, as part of its new ODA partnership, UNDP and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs launched a mobility fund, which is basically a rapid South-South cooperation funding instrument, which manages to address some of the ad hoc needs of the priority ODA countries for Romania. For example, this instrument for the last year has supported 16 experience sharing initiatives, and mainly in the areas, because Romania is very good in the area of electoral management, competition law, cross-border police cooperation, and also food safety. Czech Republic, and the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs actually mentioned this today, has allocated significant resources via the UNDP Czech Trust Fund to support knowledge sharing again with the Western Balkan countries. Among others, this support has enabled Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, and also the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia to strengthen their national systems to prevent HIV. Montenegro also benefited from this instrument, and they've started to work on a more efficient state audit institution. Again, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia to construct the first energy efficient kindergarten based on the experience of the Czech Republic. And last example which I want to give, this is in the area of post-conflict settings, and this is linked to the establishment of a Center for Excellence, which is in the area of security sector reform. This Center of Excellence will be within the framework of UNDP-run regional Southeastern and Eastern Europe clearinghouses for the control of small arms and light weapons. This is the CSAC project, funded, by the EU, where this Center of Excellence, basically, I'm very close to finishing, will have a roster of technical experts that will support the governments in two main areas, arms control and also gender mainstreaming. So with these examples, I hope I was able to illustrate some of the partnerships which is this cooperation where the UNDP can support the governments. And we are very keen to continue partnering with the new EU member states and emerging donors in promoting the East-East cooperation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Elena. Very good examples also illustrating what Vesna said earlier, how to sort of turn the experience into knowledge, etc. So all very useful. But still, look at the clock. This was another good 10, 11, 12 minutes. Yeah. If we have 10 other colleagues coming. This would take 100 minutes, which would just leave us to complete the first round before the Vice Minister comes for closing. So I think I'm in your hands. All that is interesting. But with a sort of good collective discipline, including for me not to comment too longly on what I hear, to leave a certain amount of comments in the room. But they should not put additional pressure on Leslie Miller. I think it's unfair to put pressure now on UNICEF regional officer for the region to beat and stay within the 6-10 minute framework. Thanks, Leslie. You've got the microphone.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairperson, and thank you again to the government of Croatia. I will try to be brief. Terence already shared some of the important facts and figures, including that 51% of today's refugees are under the age of 18. I would just add that in 2014, UNICEF and its partners responded to 294 humanitarian situations, 294 in 1 year, and that was in 98 different countries. situations including conflict, natural disasters, health crises, affecting millions of children. I won't go into a lot of detail. I brought a small publication for people that are interested to pick up afterwards. We know that crises add to and magnify the vulnerability children already have simply by nature of being children, and that this is especially the case when it comes to the most marginalized and excluded children. We would argue that the root causes, a topic that was referred to by many people yesterday, the root causes of conflict and humanitarian crisis are very much fueled by inequity, by chronic poverty, and by deeply rooted discrimination. And that the solutions to these problems lie with closing equity gaps for children. I'd like to highlight 4 solutions that UNICEF has found to be critical to giving every child a fair chance from the very beginning. The first is data, and specifically disaggregated data on children. We believe that data needs to be available and used by policymakers, and not just averages, but actually the breakdown, so we can see who the most vulnerable and marginalized children are, be it by geographic region, by ethnicity, by disability, etc. This involves, of course, working with national statistical offices, but also sometimes looking at legislation, which in some countries, particularly in this region, actually make it illegal to collect certain types of disaggregated data, particularly when it comes to ethnicity. And that also requires further investment in child rights monitoring systems and research. The second area I would like to highlight is early childhood development. And by that, I mean services and support, especially for the most disadvantaged children, to have a good start in life, be it healthcare or creating a stimulating and nurturing home environment and opportunities for early learning. We know from a great deal of evidence that giving children, the youngest children, a good start from the beginning enables them to have much better outcomes later in life in terms of education, in terms of employment, and it's quite time sensitive. So if we don't invest in the right time in children's lives, we're going to pay for it later on. And likewise, it brings a tremendous return on investment, and that return is more dramatic when you look at the most vulnerable children. The third area I wanted to highlight is around building systems, strong and inclusive systems, health, education, social protection. And those systems need to provide quality services for all before the emergencies happen, but also to be able to withstand the stress of an emergency. And I think we see tremendous examples of that, both positive and negative. If we think about the Ebola crisis in West Africa, we saw health systems literally collapsing under the crisis. As opposed to looking, people mentioned Turkey. If we look at Turkey and specifically the case of education, with international support, the Turkish education system is somehow coping and managing to provide education for the 2 million Syrian refugees, despite the challenges of language and other significant challenges. But at least the system hasn't collapsed. Then finally, the fourth area I wanted to highlight is involving children, child participation. We talked about involving women and involving refugees in decision-making, well, equally so with children. When it comes to decisions that affect them, giving young people space to express their views and actually become agents of change. And this is as important in a pre-conflict setting as it is in a refugee or post-conflict setting. And Terence mentioned some of the peace building and education for peace initiatives, and those are all extremely relevant. UNICEF, unlike some of the other UN agencies, has a mandate to work before, during, and after an emergency. And that gives us maybe a different perspective. We're using post-emergency situations as opportunities for further development. The floods here in southeastern Europe are one good example where we're building on the work we did during the floods. Another example is the partnership we have with the European Union in 14 countries, the Learning for Peace initiative, which is working in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East to build more cohesive and resilient societies through education for children. Yesterday, many colleagues mentioned the upcoming World Humanitarian Summit, which will take place next year. And we would just like to add our voice to calling for some reflection and change of the humanitarian system, in particular as it concerns children affected by protracted conflict, long-term conflicts. Sometimes we call them frozen conflicts, where children, sometimes for a whole generation, are affected by conflict without really getting the support they need. And that would, of course, call for long-term financing and more flexible funding, but also, some mentioned it already this morning, breaking these silos between development assistance and humanitarian assistance, and how to ensure that those kind of situations get the funding they need. Lastly, we welcome as well the emergence of the new and small donors, and we are confident that through the partnership, the knowledge generation, and the resources, modest or not modest, used smartly, as Mrs. Coase said this morning, that we can make a difference for the world's most vulnerable children. UNICEF is ready to continue partnering with you, and we look forward to continuing to achieve significant results for children. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Leslie, both for having also drawn the bridge with previous speakers, but already having put some pointers on the research community on some of the aspects, plus leaving a few very good examples in the room. With that, Carlos Pinarua from the World Bank, country manager Croatia, but also with coming in from the World Bank, but also with a strong private sector edge, which will allow me then to pass on to other private sector intervenants in a moment. Carlos, please.
Thank you so much, Marcus. We at the World Bank have two very clear goals given to us by our governors, which is to eliminate extreme poverty by 2030 and to enhance the prosperity of the bottom 40 in the economic strata. It's clear that with 1.5 billion people estimated to be living in conflict-affected areas, it will be very hard for us to reach these goals without addressing their needs. So what is the framework of the World Bank for working with conflict-affected states? There are three main pillars. Building state capacity, that means an effective, responsive, and accountable government. For that, we need, there has been mention of improvements in governance. For us, working in particular in enhancing fiduciary procedures of the government is critical. The second pillar is building capacity of the citizens. And this means not only improving health, education services, but also dealing with hearing the voice of the communities. We have, in particular, one project that I was part of in Indonesia, a community-driven development that is extremely successful, but also shows the limitations of the government in addressing efficiently the needs of the poorest and the most vulnerable of the countries. Finally, the third pillar is promoting inclusive growth and jobs. Has this been successful, this framework for assisting countries? We were part of an independent evaluation of our efforts in these countries in 2013. And this independent evaluation showed that while there had been progress by the World Bank in addressing the needs of the population in these countries, there were some issues that we had not addressed appropriately. I want to raise three in particular. One, and I'm sure my colleagues to the left will agree and sympathize with this, was coordination among donors and stakeholders. Much of the problem related not only to sometimes conflicting advice, but more importantly, overwhelming the government, the recipient. With lack of capacity as it is, having a multiplicity of donors and voices telling them what to do, when to do it, and how to do it, simply overwhelmed the government and undermine the efficacy of our efforts. The second one was related to gender. While the independent evaluators found that we had been successful, in particular, in improving the quality of health, education, services, and also in efforts on early childhood development, we had not done enough when it came to violence against women. Finally, jobs, which is one of the pillars that I referred to. The evaluator found that while, again, we had done a significant effort in trying to improve the business environment in the conflict-affected states, not enough has been done to improve the quality of the business environment in those countries. The response of our management has been quite swift on this. And on the first two aspects, clearly there's an issue of improving our coordination efforts, not only with our colleagues in the UN group, but also NGOs and governments. On the third one, which is one close to my heart, I was part of a group that worked on Iraq in 2013. And I was a younger economist. I don't want to say a young economist because I wasn't. And I had the opportunity to meet a fantastic diplomat, Sergio Vieira de Mello, on August 19, 2003. And he told us that if we could do anything for this country, was to get jobs, jobs, and jobs. And I think he was absolutely right. I think where we lack is in our efforts to help these countries is in getting the economy going back together, which is not an easy challenge. You know, there is a lack of infrastructure, a lack of access to finance, and many other challenges. But we had to find solutions. We have to, and we have found some solutions or proposed solutions in dealing with these gaps. One of them is establishing public-private partnership for dialogue in trying to find solutions. Because one of the critical problems, and some of the speakers have already mentioned this and will mention this, is an issue of chronism. When you have weak institutions, then the private sector is not really a private sector. It's a sector. It's capture. There is a lot of political capture by certain groups. So it's very difficult to do. So the bank tries to help in this area by using its role as an independent voice in trying to increase the accountability of how decisions that affect the private sector are taken. We have some successes in Nepal, Afghanistan, and Liberia that have shown good results, but still a lot to be done. And I think we need to do still more to, at least in my mind, honor Sergio's view that essential to moving away from conflict is job and inclusive private sector. Thank you so much.
No, thanks a lot, Carlos, also for sharing, and that large organizations, also like your own, have some very pertinent evaluations which are worth to look at, and not as an ex post reflection, but actually as an ex ante input into new policies. And I'm also pleased to say that between the European Union and World Bank, we have first joint evaluations of larger programs. I've seen, for instance, one which we jointly did on 10 years involvement in Uganda, which is fascinating to see how the coordination aspect played out or did not play out across sort of years of donor darling, and then having bumpy roads with corruption issues. Again, an aspect raised by the organizers, and how in this case we have managed to overcome some of that, but with still quite a lessons to be taken forward on coordination, and then on jobs. Evidently, we'll hear from the private sector in a moment. This probably also has to be linked with the investment climate, generally speaking, apart from taking the private sector out of its chronism. And with that, I'm very pleased to have opposite of me the Vice President for International Affairs and European Union of the Croatian Chamber of Economy, Mr. Zelimir Kramaric. Please, you've got the microphone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dear guests, Excellencies, first of all, allow me to greet you on behalf of the Croatian Chamber of Economy. And since I used to be the Assistant Minister of Tourism until the 1st of June, I would like to welcome you in Dubrovnik in the light of my previous post. And of course, after listening all these kind of things and the big issues and of course the problems that were caused by the conflicts and many other things, and of course, I would like to start with, we are talking now about the economy, and I would like to continue with my predecessor, which is jobs, jobs, and jobs. And of course, when we are talking about the Croatian Chamber of Economy, of course, we are positioned here in Croatia. Now we are a member of EU. But everybody from the region and, of course, many people here in this room remembers that Croatia Chamber of Economy has the institutional knowledge and experience about how to open the new horizons for the business and working together between the countries that until yesterday were in the conflict. And of course the business has to continue, and of course Croatia is ready to share, the Croatian Chamber of Economy is ready to share this experience with the other else. When we are talking in the light of that, actually 20 days ago I was in Vienna together with the chambers from Western Balkans, and it was one of the first meetings with the chambers between the Chamber of Serbia and the Chamber of Kosovo, which was a huge step in cooperation between these two countries. And of course they were asking Croatian Chamber of Economy to participate in this meeting, to help them and to support this process, and of course we were there. When we are talking about the future and the working together in the economic sense, Croatian Chamber of Economy is as a chamber in the European Union, of course, is looking forward for the cooperation in the framework of the Euro Chambers, World Federation of the Chambers, and International Chamber of Commerce, which are very important forums. But of course, through the possibilities which are given through the Adriatic Ionian, Danube, and many other strategies, we see huge potential for the cooperation, and of course we see the huge responsibility of your directorate, Mr. Chairman, which will give us possibility that the chambers as the channels of the communications, and of course with the huge number of members, will give the opportunity to their members to enlarge development cooperation between the countries and of course between the businesses, especially in the light of the new platform which we are planning in the Croatian Chamber of Economy, which are connected first of all to the digital economy, to connecting the businesses in terms of the digital agenda which is given by the EU. The second thing is, of course, innovation, R&D, which gives the huge opportunity using the knowledge of the countries which are in the problems, and the institutional knowledge of many faculties, institutes, and science to enhance the economy, and of course after that opening the new jobs and the possibilities. Third is, of course, the most members of our economic systems in EU and, of course, all over the world are the SMEs. And, of course, the chambers can play a very important role as the infrastructure for the SMEs and connecting them. And finally, education. And I'm really glad today here to have on the table Mrs. Evka Heder from the CESEL, because Croatia Chamber of Economy is one of the founders of CESEL, and we are very strongly cooperating with them in this sense. Of course, we are looking, and I'm really glad because we also started on my previous post one. We can, I mean, Evka will tell you much more about this, and it's one project about the cooperation in the new innovative tourism projects, and of course, Chamber will participate in this. And we see the huge potential in this kind of cooperation in the future and sharing this. So giving possibility to the businesses is for us a basic thing, because giving possibility to economy to boost will give us huge chance to avoid many kind of very bad things that was mentioned in a previous discussion here on the table. And I would like to, for the end, to point out especially the fact that one of the basic human rights is is the freedom of the entrepreneurship, because without freedom for the entrepreneurship, it's not possible, what was mentioned in your presentation, it's not possible to have a very strong private sector. And basically without this, without the freedom for the entrepreneurship and the business, it's not going to be, it's a basic foundation for all the other kind of human rights in the society. Thank you very much.
No, thanks a lot, Zelimir, for adding quite a few interesting points, certainly to pick up not just sort of the job creation factor, be it tourism or others, but also the peace and bridge building capacity chambers like yours have with other parts of a previously conflictual neighborhood. And you mentioned your own recently interacting with Serbian chambers and others, and this is certainly an example one should extrapolate, not just to wait only for public institutions to come in, but in fact even to use maybe even earlier the private sector already as a bridge building element. And then also to draw on the aspect of education, where indeed Mrs. Evka Heder, the director of the Southeast European Center for Entrepreneurial Learning, is here with us, and also with a previous experience with the European Training Foundation, I understand. So with that, I'm happy to give you the microphone.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much for the given opportunity that I share with you the experience of CSEL. Actually, last 2 days we were hearing about the good examples of transforming from the receiver to giver, and the CSEL is this example. Established in 2009 on the request of the 8 countries from the region, and please have in mind 2000, geocomplexity of the region was much more complex than it's nowadays. Republic of Croatia offer that they coordinate the process with the full respect and full support of the 8 countries, and CSEL is established in 2009. What is the main principle of CSEL? It's a structured partnership, and this is where CSEL is recognized as a best practice in the field from 2009. So from the day one, structured partnership, the lesson learned is public-private sector together, with the 2 co-founders, Republic of Croatia, represented to the Ministry of Entrepreneurship, supporting the freedom of entrepreneurship, hand in hand with the business associations, Croatian Chamber of Economy. Step 2, the transfer was given to support full partnership operations. 8 member states, together with the European Commission, has the equal voting right in the governing board. So the governance modality is here. And then the layer partnership with implementation of the actions. From the level of institutions like schools, universities, business associations, regional development agencies. So these are the postulates which we are implementing and practicing since 2009. The core thing or the ethos of the work is that we work all together in the inclusion of entrepreneurship education as a key competence, with the financial literacy included in the all educational system, no matter are we talking about formal one or non-formal one, in line with the policy essentials of European Commission on one hand, but as well as by the agreement of the UNESCO that entrepreneurship is a key competence and which need to be included in the whole system. In parallel, the CSEL is working since 2009 on the issues of women entrepreneurs. Why? We do not see that entrepreneurship does have a gender, because it does not have. You don't have masculine entrepreneurship and feminine entrepreneurship, but you have men and women entrepreneurs. And what is seen, the correlation by all the surveys is, if the level of entrepreneurial education and financial literacy is low, and you have the low participation of women entrepreneurs in the society, there is dependent variable that the level of economic development is low. So what are the lessons learned from our work? Talking about good practices, the basic principle is one shoe does not fit all. What is nice shoe for me is hurting the other society very much. So full respect of all partners included, with a full sense of ownership with the actions taken. The second thing is that with what we learned from our work, that thinking and acting entrepreneurially, with entrepreneurship as a key competence for every citizen, is actually in the mid-run and the long run is creating an opening perspective, which is actually the key for sustainable development, and it's very important for recovering areas. When we talk about recovering areas in CSEL, we don't see just conflict areas, but also the areas which were wounded by the natural catastrophes and industrial downsizing and collapsing, which we see also that they are the areas of the big risk, high risk. Also from the CISL experience, we see that it's a successful action to be taken in the processes of demilitarization and back to the normal life, and not just connected with the job creation, but also connected with inclusion momentums, because working with the vulnerable groups, we can see in the midterm and the long term that actually activization rate of all parts of the societies is increasing, and that we have the savings on the budget for other actions to be included. There is a direct link on the long-term creation of anti-corruption mentality and respect for the public good. And actually, it's a direct linking to influencing on increase of level of economic activity with the social responsible entrepreneurships. What is the next lesson learned? That when we talk about migrations, flows, and migration push, we need to be aware of two areas, so emitting areas and emitting areas. The lesson learned is that if we act in the emitting areas with entrepreneurship as a key competence, actually we will get in-routing and we will diminish the level of immigration, as well as of the inclusion of the people who are immigrating in certain different society, that we are increasing the level of their and fasting the level of their social inclusion, because we are giving the perspective with these kind of actions. Allow me that I share also with you that what was institutional baby in 2009, 2015 is actually one of the best practices of European Commission with the award of European Parliament, actually the second one. The first one was OECD, so we are happy to be the second one. And allow me to thank Croatian government and Croatian Chamber of Economy as co-founders and also financially supporters, European Commission, Swedish Development Instrument, and CISL member states, because this is the reason that we are here today. And allow me also to share with you that we got the expression of interest for contribution or inclusion or collaboration with colleagues from Jordan, Palestine, Tunisia, Moldova, Ukraine, Georgia, Belarus, other Eastern partner countries, and the third countries as Bangladesh. So the doors of CISL are open for all the collaboration, and please allow me my personal reflection on small and big. In CISL, we don't see the small and big, everyone counts. Even the continents and the oceans and the seas are not of the same size, but still they're building wonderful home, which is called Earth. Thank you very much.
No, thanks a lot, Efka, for again, very useful pointers, reconfirming the public-private partnership in that, reconfirming a lot of what is education, being linked to early opportunities for gender, and the clear marker of that has on overall economic growth, and also reminding us that if we look at sort of conflict prevention, not just look at sort of fragile military conflicts, but also that we have zones at risk facing massive industrial downsizing, and sort of part of the things we're witnessing in Ukraine, among many others, is also a part of that story, and national disasters. With that, I'm also very pleased that we can sort of turn now the prisma to hear from church and religious leaders, both as actors for development, but also, of course, more generally as a public voice in advancing the agenda. And with that, I'm happy to ask first Ms. Anna Uloznik, who is from the Pontifical Mission Societies in the Republic of Croatia, and the director of the Cardinal Stepanik Children's Home in Haiti also. So please, with that, you have the microphone.
Hvala lijepa. Najprije se želim zahvaliti organizatorima na pozivu za sudjelovanje na Croatia forumu. Ovih dana smo često čuli, a i danas, da je Hrvatska država mali donator pomoći zemljama trećeg svijeta.
Just 10 seconds so that each and everyone requiring a translation can make sure that we have that done, and this would be on channel.
Možete se.
Najprije se želim zahvaliti organizatorima na pozivu za sudjelovanje na Croatia forumu. Ovih dana smo često čuli, a i danas, da je Hrvatska država mali donator pomoći zemljama trećeg svijeta, ali to malo, prema mome iskustvu, ponekad je puno. Dolazeći iz Haitija, najsiromašnije zemlje zapadne hemisfere, gdje ljudi umiru od obične upale zuba, žive u šatorima bez struje, vode i osnovnih higijenskih uvjeta. Djeca nemaju pristup školovanju i osiguranom mirnom djetinjstvu i to malo čini bitnu razliku. U tom duhu vidjeti čovjeka, ovdje mogu posvjedočiti da Hrvatska preko crkve u Hrvata u svijetu daje svoju pomoć preko 90 misionara i misionarki u svijetu. To su Kongo, Tanzanija, Ruanda, Uganda, Peru, Benin, Kamerun, Burundi, Bolivija, Kenija, Albanija, Madagaskar, Nikaragva, Antigva i Barbuda, Čile, Bugarska, Kosovo, Haiti. Svi ovi misionari su otišli u te siromašne zemlje svijeta iz ljubavi prema čovjeku. Čovjeku koji živi na rubu siromaštva i koji se nalazi u velikim poteškoćama, ekonomskim, socijalnim, zdravstvenim. Djelovanja misionara su usmjerena na pomoć čovjeku kroz odgoj i formaciju mladih ljudi, kroz dječje domove, škole, zdravstvene ustanove te razne projekte. Jednim malim dijelom smo vidjeli kako Hrvatska preko misionara pruža pomoć siromašnim zemljama, a ti isti misionari trebaju pomoć malih i velikih donatora, kako bi mogli svoje aktivnosti i djelovanje ne samo produžiti, nego njime osigurati kontinuirano pružanje pomoći da bi se osigurali osnovni i dostojanstveni uvjeti za život. Na ovaj forum sam došla s Haitija. Od siječnja 2014. godine se nalazim tamo zajedno sa mojom zajednicom sestara služavki Maloga Isusa. Djelujemo u sirotištu Kardinal Stepina Children's Home, gdje se nalazi 48 djece, koju odgajamo i o kojoj skrbimo, kojima omogućavamo školovanje i pripremamo ih na samostalan život, kako bi sutra mogli osnovati svoju obitelj, te također biti korisni građani. Poznato nam je da je Haiti pogodio strašni potres 2010. godine i da je taj isti potres ponovno donio još veće siromaštvo. To je zemlja u kojoj oko 80% stanovništva živi siromašno. Većina stanovništva živi u šatorima ili nekim improviziranim kućicama od lima i cerada, bez osnovnih higijenskih uvjeta, bez hrane, zdravstva. Haiti ovisi od međunarodne pomoći koja i danas stiže tamo, a nažalost sve manje. Teško je danas u ovom modernom dobu vidjeti čovjeka da živi u takvim uvjetima u kojima taj narod živi. Ali unatoč svemu ti ljudi vole život i imaju osmijeh na licu. S obzirom na toliko siromaštvo i još težu sliku ostavljaju cijene živežnih namirnica i zdravstva. Škole i bolnice su privatne pa se sve plaća, a kriminal i korupcija su u porastu. Svima nam je poznato da su velika materijalna sredstva skupljena za Haiti nakon potresa, a ja slobodno mogu reći da se na Haitiju ne da primijetiti gdje je taj novac uložen. A osim toga bilo i projekata koji su ostvareni samo da se može reći da su sredstva tamo uložena. Nabrojit ću neke od tih. Ulaganje u agrikulturu. Donirana su velika sredstva u jedan projekat agrikulturi, ali donator je htio da se to napravi samo na tom jednom mjestu. Bez obzira što je domaći stručnjak za agrikulturu, s obzirom na osobno iskustvo, rekao da tu ne može uspijevati, nego tek par kilometara dalje. Isti nisu to htjeli čuti. Tako da je projekat ostvaren na tom mjestu, ali par mjeseci poslije toga sve je propalo. Što reći? Da je bilo koji kilometar dalje, danas bi neke obitelji imali sigurna sredstva za svoj život i budućnost. Isto tako mogu reći i o izgradnji domova za obitelji, stanova u jednom lijepom mjestu, ali odvojenom od svega. Ti stanovi, to jest apartmani, su danas nažalost prazni, jer u blizini toga nema škole, bolnice, radnog mjesta. A tko si može priuštiti prijevoz i isti plaćati ili ići tražiti radno mjesto? a zdravstvo je priča za sebe. To si mogu samo rijetki priuštiti. Zašto? Zato što se svaka usluga naplaćuje, od vađenja zdravstvenog kartona, pregleda liječnika. Ako trebate infuziju, istu trebate otići kupiti u apoteku, te doći do medicinske sestre i njoj platiti da vam istu priključi. Ako želite ležati dok primate infuziju, trebate platiti krevet. Tako da oni koji si priušte infuziju, većinom su na hodniku ili pored bolnice hodaju ili sjede, držeći u rukama svoju infuziju, dok je velikoj većini to samo san. U našem domu također imamo dječaka od 2 godine. Kada je imao 3 mjeseca, majka mu je umrla od obične upale zuba, jer nije imala $20 da ode zubaru. Nažalost, to su samo neki od teških životnih situacija koje proživljavaju ljudi u ovoj dalekoj siromašnoj zemlji, kojoj je potrebna pomoć. I po ovome možemo vidjeti da je bitna pomoć i malih donatora, jer kroz razne projekte mogu se spasiti veliki broj života. Na kraju bih htjela naglasiti važnost suradnje davatelja pomoći i primatelja te iste pomoći. Uvjerena sam da zajedničkim snagama, analizom trenutne situacije i stanja mogu se naći zajednička rješenja i ciljevi, te da sa obe strane treba biti velika otvorenost za slušanje i razgovaranje, a iznad svega mislim da donatori trebaju biti otvoreni u poznavanju kulture naroda kojem pomažu. Jer ako se ne poštuje ta ista kultura, ljudi neće biti otvoreni za suradnju, a i projekti nemaju budućnosti.
No, thank you very much also for coming all the way from Haiti with very, very pertinent comments and insights. I think we hear time and over again still the lack of capacity of donors to listen and go back to the roots, whether in the aggregate or in the small, but also I think good examples that small things still do matter, so that's still worth taking forward. I'm also reminded of Nepal, having listened also to you very, very recently. A similar big earthquake struck, and an earthquake everyone was expecting. Everyone is expecting, and those who could afford did fend and have the means and reserves, but the lack of poor people just could not afford to protect them accordingly. And also, I'm very attentive to what you said about the larger donor money not having sort of addressed really the real needs. It's also one where the European Union is quite heavily criticized by the Court of Auditors and others of not having pooled all resources, and it's also one where I do know that, for instance, cholera is still at a shockingly high level, causing of death, where there's unfinished business at UN and international level. So thank you very much for those insights. With that, I'm pleased to give on the microphone to Mr. Sadiq Heric, who is the Imam from the Islamic community. Thank you very much for having patience until now, but you've got now the microphone and very eager to listen to what you have to say.
Uvaženi prisutni, cijenjeni organizator ovog skupa, poštovani predavači, dozvolite da vas pozdravim i izrazim svoje poštovanje organizatoru i učesnicima ovog hvale vrijednog skupa koji se održava ovdje u Dubrovniku, za kojeg slobodno možemo kazati da je grad multikulture, suživota i međureligijskog dijaloga. Kao predstavnik mešihata islamske zajednice u Hrvatskoj, odnosno u osobi glavnog imama Medrese islamske zajednice u Dubrovniku, kao čovjek odgojen i odrastao u pluralnom, multikulturnom i multinacionalnom ambijentu, podržavam vaše aktivnosti jer su one u funkciji dobrobiti čovjeka i kao takve u punom suglasju sa osnovnim postulatima vjere islama. Mi nismo u stanju voditi i rješavati političke probleme ili učestvovati u bilo kako većim donacijama, jer smo jedna mala zajednica kako na lokalnoj, tako i na državnoj razini, ali smo dobro organizirani i dobro uvezani u hrvatsko društvo. Ali to ne znači da ne moramo djelovati među ljudima i s jedne i druge strane, ispred i iza. Na stranicama Kur'ana čitamo o čovječanstvu koje opstoji i na razlikama kao na nečemu što je uvjet bez čega čovječanstvo ne može ni postojati, samo je moguće različito čovječanstvo, narodi sa različitim bojama kože, različitim jezicima, što više u tome je i znak Božiji. U suštini sve knjige objavljene od Boga, listovi Abrahamovi, Tora, Psalmi, Inđil i Kur'an, pozivaju čovjeka da djeluje na zemlji razborito, jer je čovjek razumno biće i kao takvoga je Bog uzdigao iznad ostalih stvorenja. Kur'an poziva na komunikaciju. Često se pitamo da li postoji recept za uspješni život i ne nalazimo drugog odgovora osim dijaloga, no o dijalogu ne odlučujemo sami. Potrebno se otvarati, a ne držati nepristupačnim i zatvorenim i smatrati samo sebe Božijim odabranikom. Zar to nije egoizam? A toga smo, nažalost, danas svjedoci kako ovdje, tako u Evropi i ako hoćemo u cijelom svijetu. Kur'an poziva na dijalog među ljudima općenito, a posebno s kršćanima i židovima, kao i s ateistima. U svim tim dijalozima polazi od zajedničkog osnova čovjeka kao ljudskog bića, nastojeći da se tako dođe i do zajedničkih stavova. Mi moramo izaći iz uskih zatvorenih krugova, početi se oslobađati predrasuda i fobija od drugog i drugačijeg. Toga smo, nažalost, svjedoci, dakle, i ovih dana, na kraju ćemo tome kazati. U uvjetima našeg zajedničkog života dijalog se nameće kao nužna potreba kad znamo da naše društvo sačinjavaju veći broj nacionalnih i vjerskih zajednica i raznih ideologija. Ovakva spoznaja čini osnovni preduvjet dijaloga. Kod dijaloga je vrlo bitno međusobno priznavanje, a sudionici moraju biti ravnopravni. Dijalog ne smije imati za cilj neko skolastičko nadmudrivanje, niti međusobno napadanje. U našim uvjetima dijalog mora polaziti sa zajedničkih pozicija i težiti ka zajedničkom cilju. Prije svega, svi smo ljudi koji je jedan Bog stvorio, svi smo Božja stvorenja koja žive i djeluju na zemlji i svi imamo jednake obaveze i jednaka prava, bar bi tako trebalo da bude. Svakodnevno smo svjedoci da ima i onih koji oponiraju međureligijskom i međudruštvenom dijalogu. Kod muslimana se promišlja da je intencija kršćanskog dijaloga određeni vid evangelizacije, a kod kršćana je mišljenje da je intencija muslimanskog dijaloga određeni vid islamizacije. Treba jasno kazati da nije cilj dijaloga niti evangelizacija, niti islamizacija. U našem vremenu prepoznajemo dvostruku ulogu. Dijalog je prije svega komunikacija kultura, naroda i tradicija. Dijalog je jedini ispravan način međusobnog upoznavanja i razbijanja predrasuda jednih od drugih. Međusobno nepoznavanje izaziva fobiju, fobija izaziva prezir i mržnju, a mržnja dovodi do kaotičnog stanja. Zato je poruka jasna ka dijalogu bez straha u svim segmentima, političkim, vjerskim, kulturnim, ekonomskim i tako dalje. Sve više sazrijeva spoznaja kako na lokalnoj, tako i na globalnoj razini o potrebi međusobnog komuniciranja, o potrebi uzajamnog poštivanja. Osnovni imperativ našeg vremena je međusobno povezivanje i odbacivanje raznih antagonističkih elemenata iz prošlosti. Danas sve češće u literaturi kao javnom govoru susrećemo Darul Ahd, kuća dogovora. Taj pojam i taj termin je najprimjereniji danas u komunikaciji. Naša društvena zajednica, mislim ovdje na Republiku Hrvatsku, u kojoj djelujemo, dakle živimo i tako dalje, može se nazvati Darul Ahd, kuća dogovora. Država, kao što Republika Hrvatska, pored katoličke crkve, potpisala još ugovor sa 14 vjerskih zajednica. Tim ugovorom se riješila mnoga pitanja od zajedničkog interesa za državu, ali i za zajednice. Među njima je islamska zajednica koja je potpisala ugovor 2002. godine, što može poslužiti u Evropi, pa ako hoćemo i u svijetu kao model. Ovakvi i slični ugovori preveniraju možebitne sukobe, izjednačavaju sve vjerske zajednice pred zakonom, potiču na zajedništvo i vjernost, obavezuju i udružuju vjerske zajednice na izgradnju boljeg i funkcionalnijeg dijaloškog ozračja. Istovremeno, vjerske zajednice su partneri državi u promicanju svih univerzalnih vrijednosti društva. Islam kao sveobuhvatan životni sustav, pored vjerskih normi, propisuje pravila društvenog ponašanja, temeljna kuranska postavka za ovako promišljanje i uređenje međuljudskih odnosa i Božji poziv: o ljudi, mi vas od jednog čovjeka, jedne žene stvaramo i na narode vas dilimo, da bi skupa živjeli i bogobojazni bili i na koncu bili bezbjedni, a danas fali bezbjednosti, kao smo čuli u ovim raspravama. Uvažavanjem ovih kuranskih polazišta, naša multikonfesionalna i multinacionalna ljudska zajednica u rješavanju egzistencijalnih potreba i trasiranju civilizacijskih tokova mora polaziti od priznavanja iskonskih ljudskih prava i realnih činjenica. Kome ne zvone zvona mira, utonut će u sumrak rata. O tome smo čuli, što nažalost nas žalosti. Umjesto vjere u jednog transcendentnog Boga javlja se religija sestava koja je po Rože Garodiju napravila novi politeizam i nova sujevjera, pretvarajući nauku u scientizam, tehniku u tehnokratiju, politiku u materializam. Materialistička religija je slijepa vjera u skrivenog Boga, takozvani profit, to je da se proizvodi što više, sve brže, bilo šta, korisno, nekorisno ili čak ubojito, kao što je oružje koje predstavlja najrentabilniju industriju danas. Taj skriveni Bog je okrutan Bog, on zahtijeva ljudske žrtve, što danas, dopustite jednu digresiju, moram to naglasiti, bez obzira na minutažu, ispričavam se. Danas je 11. srpanj, dan kada će se obilježiti 20 godina od genocida Bošnjaka muslimana u Srebrenici. Prošlost i sadašnjost sve se više miješaju, isprepliću, tako da je ponekad doista teško jasno odrediti gdje smo to, ako uopće jesmo, u kojem stoljeću, u kojoj godini, u kojoj zemlji, u kojoj stvarnosti. Jesu li prestali zločin ubijanja ili još ubijaju? Jesu li prestala rušenja kuća, džamija, crkava i drugih bogomolja, mostova, mezarja, grobalja, bacanja tijela nevinih ljudi, žena, djece u bezdane jame i druge masovne grobnice? Je li ovo neki težak san iz kojeg se ne možemo probuditi, ali to je stvarnost u kojoj, nažalost, smo mi postali nestvarni? Dijelim mišljenje bivšeg američkog predsjednika Bill Clintona, koji je u Srebrenici rekao: nadam se i molim se da Srebrenica cijelom svijetu bude podsjetnik za humanost. Zahvaljujem se i Boga molim da ovaj skup odašilje poruku mira, poruke stabilnosti i da ne bude ovo o čemu smo danas slušali na ovom forumu.
No, thank you very much for these very good words, Mr. Imam Salkan Heric. Two things stand out, or three things. In fact, it's very good also to register that here in Croatia we have also a very good example on how to deal with multi-religious networks, and also that this should be spread throughout the world. I also liked what I heard through the very thankful interpretation. Religious communities as partners to the states. I think this sets a very good sort of way on giving a full role to religion, keeping it secular, but as a main actor and partner to the state, and then also to have reminded also of today's historic commemoration. With that, I'm also very pleased that we have with us a renowned representative of the Jewish community from the city of Zagreb, and I'm happy to give the microphone to Ms. Sanja Tabaković, who represents the national minority in the city of Zagreb. Please, you've got the microphone.
Thank you very much. First of all, I like to thank the organizer to invite me and giving me the opportunity to speak on a subject what for us Jews has always been a topical issue, and in the last decade has been a burning one. In fact, dealing with the past is a rule dealing with our own committed errors, and that is not easy either for individuals or for nations. To avoid unpleasant topics, it is said that it is the best to leave history to historians. The study of historical facts should be left to scientists, but in order to interpret and understand these facts, it is important to speak with the moral and human aspects, and to do that one doesn't need to be a historian. Croatia is not the only country that has problem with that. In fact, only Germany has really confronted its own past and comprehended the causes and consequences of its actions, so it is probably far more prepared to face the present, which scared. This took many years, a lot of goodwill and hard work. But today there are in Germany many generations of people whose worldview is not poisoned with the eternal excuses for past wrongdoings. Across Europe, radical rights movement has been growing stronger, supported by economic crisis and situation in many ways reminiscent of the period before the Second War. We can clearly recognize signs of a growing risk in a more fascist Europe. But today we have a little bit more complicated situation because there is refugees crisis, humanitarian crisis, and terrorism, which was unknown in that time. Before Second War, the world had not the experience of the Holocaust, which it has today, so there is no excuse for indifference to the smallest hint of fascism or only sporadic hatred towards anyone from its own environment. Better to say that we have to be even more careful because the population in most European countries is deeply divided and dissatisfied with their lives. There is more than enough reason to be careful. We have been witnessing unacceptable events on stadiums, swastika on our houses, saluting with the fascist salute, high school graduates singing Ustaša songs, etc., etc. What has been done are appropriate instruments being designed for an open struggle with the rising xenophobia and neo-fascism. I do not see them, but the time has come to deal with that seriously, and I hope it would not be too late. In fact, the most terrible events start slowly and quietly. The Holocaust did not start in Auschwitz, it ended there. For years, the protagonist of Nazism has been floating trial balloons, testing their own people, and only when the majority was sufficiently prepared for expressing their hatred or scared enough not to respond, only then did fascism finally gain strength. Only then did the silent majority allow the Holocaust to become a worldwide project and gain the epic extent of destructions. Because of that, today, 70 years after the Holocaust, I am standing here and talking about it. It is the most terrible lesson the humanity has ever needed to learn because it happened to anyone. Srebrenica is a very good example for this. Therefore, then, when talking about the swastika at the Poljud Stadium in Split, believe me, the Jewish community in Croatia does not care about the type of penalty, be it minor or major, imposed by UEFA. We are seriously scared, and we wonder if our parents made a mistake when they did not left Europe together with those few Holocaust survivors. Are we perhaps repeating the same mistake? On the other hand, we as a Jewish community are trying to do what is in our power. We actively participate in all social events of the society we live in and try to make it better. We have established the Shoah Academy for education about the Holocaust, tolerance, democracy, and civil and human rights. We work together with the newly established Anti-Fascist League in Croatia, but these are all actions of the civil society, so that no matter how important they may be, their influence on trends of society is very limited. The whole in Europe needs to face the old wounds, old mistakes, and decide not to repeat them, and should together work out the strategy. The same has to be done in Croatia. Had the people in this area on time faced their past, maybe the last war here would have been less terrible, or the war would not have happened. Or maybe we would be more successfully to build better society after of this war. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for what is a very important contribution here, also from rounding up what we hear from the three different world leaders. Thank you very much, I think, for for having pointed to 2 or 3 things which are part of the overall debate. I think in a very dramatic way you have recalled the principle of principiis obsta. You have to be fighting from the very onset the first signs of degradation and of hatred. This is something which already Safia had said. This was an oversight in Iraq. We have heard that in a number of other cases, and of course in a very dramatic way here. I also register, I think, your good words on that for society to really be steadfast and resilient against these sort of populist, nationalist, or fascist trends. It also pays off to be open and address historic flaws. And you've said yourself that in case this is done, societies indeed are more resilient to deal with these underlying problems. And I would also register, I think more generally, is that the active involvement of communities which do feel exposed and threatened also does have, if we were to draw up a list of good practices and things to follow and to support, that what you're trying to do in Zagreb with the Jewish community is a good example of doing that. With that, I'm pleased to pass on to Mr. Gordon Bozanak. Also, I think with a track record on Haiti, maybe you can follow up on some of those aspects, but you're also sort of our civil society representative, so if you want to briefly share with us a few more general lessons, that'd be fine. Before then, I would wrap up with 3 patiently waiting discussants from the research community, and then hopefully still having a few minutes left to address at least some of the core questions which you may have to pose in that particular roundtable. So with that, please, Gordon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to organizers for inviting me. And ladies and gentlemen, I think it is not surprising to see civil society representative also present on these high-level forums, discussions between the states on the development, because it is with no doubt already been proven that without the engagement of civil society in development cooperation, there will be no good results. And this engagement of civil society I see actually in 2 ways. One is of being implementing partners, implementing concrete projects on the grounds, where the states are actually collaborating with the civil society. But on the other hand, we should never forget that the second role of civil society still has to be and to be the watchdogs of development policies of the states and international communities. And constant dialogue and constructive criticism, I think it's crucial for developing really the development policies which will have good and final impact to all the people that, which are needed the support. I will say a few words about the civil society from Croatia and what I see as some specificum maybe in the development arena. Usually I like to open this, my position with the talk that the war we have experienced is actually giving us some kind of advantage, although it's really difficult to talk about the war as something that you would like to have. And I don't wish to any nation or any people that experience the war. But however, at some point, the experience we have been having during the military conflict in our country nowadays can be used more as an advantage in development policies. Unfortunately, I haven't seen that the fact that Croatia is the newest EU member states with such a recent war experience, I think hasn't been noticed well, neither by the European Union in our accession process, but neither with ourselves. And at the same time, as we know these days, particularly the European Union, it really has to have this remembrance of on the founding grounds of the European Union, when one of the objectives of the Union is also to bring peace and stability and to end up all the wars. So I think that recent Croatian war experience actually can be much more used and promoted within the European Union, but also that the institution of European Union can recognize much more the work which has been done in the region and in Croatia. So also Croatian NGOs have 2 things which can be maybe strategic advantage comparing to the others, our colleagues from the European Union. One is this direct experience working during the military conflict. So when the conflict had started in Croatia, immediately the people had started to mobilize and start to develop different actions, initiatives to end up the war and to support the victims of the war. The second advantage, which is not so common, that civil society from Croatia is a grassroots-driven civil society. Usually, which is very dangerous, we are seeing in development community that sometimes the development projects are the ones who are developing civil society. Sometimes the people start to organize themselves because there is a money coming, and so they try to organize themselves to implement the different projects. But we think we had a different approach in Croatia, that we really responded to the needs of the conflict which was taking part. And saying that, this is one more example how small civic initiatives, small NGOs can really contribute to the reconciliation and peace-building projects. And Mr. Chairman, allow me that I use also this opportunity because I know that you are working in the DG DevCo, asking for one more time that we should think in implementing the development projects really to include the small NGOs as well as the partners. So not necessarily create a big NGO giants, same as some big NGO, development state donors who are dominating the field. The small is really, really important, and I guess you are aware of the initiative of European NGOs who are advocating also to have approach to the development funds. And for the end, let me just say three things about the conflict and development, because I think this is the topic I should address, not only the security, but the conflict, and the military conflict and development, which is for me still non-explored enough topic. And I think we have something to say about it. What we would like to see as Croatian civil society is much more involvement with the development policies immediately when the conflict starts. For nowadays, usually when the military operation took place, somehow the development is put in the background of the conflict. We think that for the moment when the first bullet will be fired, that actually development policies has to take place. It doesn't mean that we have to construct the buildings in the same times when the weapon is destroying the buildings. But if we are understanding development as a broad concept, then we are talking about the human rights protection during the military conflict. Then we are talking about the gender equality during the military conflict. We are talking about the protection of civilians during the military conflict. Not to have same mistake as we have been done here, that actually 20 years after the conflict, we are getting the regulation which will end up sexual gender-based violence. So we would like really to see immediately when the military is taking part in different operations, also to see civil society more active working in the development. One of the examples, and I'm happy we are sharing it at the moment with our Ukrainian friends, is the documenting war crimes committed by the different sides of the conflict. In Croatia, it will help us much more that we've been documenting and collecting war crimes immediately when the conflict has started. Also, civil society was weak. For foreigners, it was very difficult to understand what was happening in Croatia. So many war crimes has been committed without good enough evidences, and this is why many prosecutors, unfortunately, perpetrators will not be prosecuted in Croatia. Second thing, which is very important, and I think the mistakes has been done in the past, is also to really understand who one wants to support during the conflict. I am really aware that the civil society also can be manipulated. As we know, there can be the state who will organize civil societies, there can be different religious communities. So from the position of the donors, it can be very complicated, but whom to trust? What we have seen in the region, in our conflict, but also what we have seen in the recent conflicts after the Arab Spring, for example, that sometimes the international community has chosen wrong partners, I would say. Because the criteria of respect of human rights and gender equality was not the main criteria for establishing the partnership with the civil society groups. And then everything went in a very wrong direction that we maybe wanted and that intentions were from the international community. And finally, and I will stop with that, one of the examples also we can maybe share from our own experience is about the prevention of conflict. There is not much that we can share about that. As you can imagine, unfortunately, we couldn't prevent the conflict in the region. But one thing which I really remember, and it was repeated many times also by the other analysts, was when you change the system from one-party system to the multi-party system, when their democracy finally takes place, freedom of expression actually has to be limited. The mistake we have done here, where we went from one-party system to the multi-party system, freedom of expression was used primarily for the hate speech. So we were talking each against others. This was also seen, for example, in the Arab Spring, when the freedom of expression came finally in the region of the Maghreb. We have seen the extreme religious discourse taking over the free space and actually start to talk about the hate speech and not the democracy and the free speech. So those are just some of the few examples how the experience from the conflict can be used. And I will call one more time really to start with the development projects on the day when the first bullet will be fired, which will also require from the state, maybe this is a dream, but I'm allowed to dream, that when we are planning the military operation, the budgeting from the military has to be, if not the same, but I would like to see it the same as the development budget, which has to be invested for already ending up the forthcoming military conflict. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
No, thanks a lot, Gordon, for being both very realistic, practical, and still visionary. I think part of our discussion. If already there's one conclusion, what you said, you lamented that Croatia was undervalued in its experience. I think this panel, the way it has brought out the many different assets of the Croatia recent experience, including the one you mentioned, this is something which I certainly take home and I'm quite impressed about. So this, I think, has already served its purpose. I could not agree also more with the public accountability voice we need for civil society organizations. I will not go into detail, but I recognize that also as a European Union funder of civil society organizations, there's a bit of an unfinished agenda on how small NGOs can also access some of the funding. The point you put, the finger you put on human rights and protection during conflict and not just exposed is of course valid and echoes some of the other comments we have seen. And again, it also reconfirms a current thread around many comments that the small intervention also does continue to be of relevance. With that, excellent. We have about half an hour left before the Vice Minister will join us for the closure. We have 3 interventions from the research community, which I think, keeping sort of current interventions, will at the end not allow a second round. But I think we had a good equal round of comments throughout the different angles. If there's time, I will still try to wrap up and maybe with the Vice Minister draw some first conclusions of what we have heard. I think it's fair if I first give the floor to Mr. Ping Huang from China, and then I would then sort of end up with my left side here. So anyway, still keep it not beyond 10 minutes, because otherwise I ran into problems. But I think it's fair that you can come in where the China sort of research component is and can enrich today's discussion. So please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also like to thanks to the Croatia government, its Ministry of Foreign Affairs, especially Her Excellency, the first Vice Prime Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, for inviting me and my colleagues to participate in also listening to those excellent presentations from yesterday to today. And I shared lots of concerns and insights. Someone used the term shared knowledge, and also actually in order for such a partnership, I think we need to share a vision for development and security. And I especially like the point yesterday many have already made: without without peace, no development. Without development, no peace. So peace including order, security, stability, and the rule of law nowadays, is the very precondition for development. And development is also the very base for sustainable peace. For today's very rich discussions from different perspectives, I like to see what might be the shared knowledges and lessons we learned. First, I would think this, again, we need to really recognize how security, peace links with development, sustainable development. But in order for further and more sustainable development, I think, need to first be more focused on those critical issues and goals. Even the UN or other international organizations, including the EU, has already shared some common goals, either for SDG or for post-2015 agenda. We still need to work perhaps more seriously on first targeting the real or right people or peoples, communities, regions, countries, who are the ones which need development and peace. Secondly, the program designs, we need to have sort of both quantitative and qualitative measuring for the development. What are and how, what kind of quality of such development in terms of what. And thirdly, also we need to work more seriously on how to prioritize those issues, goals, and challenges. Yesterday, colleagues from Korea have emphasized the importance of education, which I shared very much. But amongst our discussions from yesterday to today, we see actually from this priorities can be very different from one region to another, from one country to another, and from one period to another. For instance, education, of course, but it's for some areas, health might be one of the top priorities, gender equality. And for somewhere else, which mainly for those agriculture societies, perhaps irrigation, water issues. And I shared with those from both the World Bank and others, you have emphasized the jobs, jobs, and jobs. And for poverty reduction, perhaps we originally target income. But these are linked to one another. Second feature for whatever priorities, whatever challenges, however much differences we may have, one of the key shared knowledge and therefore vision for sustainable development is inclusiveness. The development has to be something for all, women, minorities, etc. And also, in order, this kind of inclusiveness will not only be something like a tolerance to or respect for others, but rather a real partnership building. So therefore, from capacity building to community building, finally the trust building, therefore we work with and for those communities for this, in order to really have a real partnership, share their concerns, their problems, and listening to their priorities, and treated them not only as poor who need money, need help, but rather they are the agents, actors who really will create jobs and increase their incomes. And the third one, again, we talked already very much, but we need to more specific, is the sustainability. Because sustainability is not only in terms of environment and ecological sort of sustain, which is, of course, still the key, especially considering the problem of challenge of climate change and the resources. But actually, sustainability is also something so crucial in terms of financial sustainability. Our financial system, banking system, monetary system, as well as social and cultural sustainability. Without the necessary consideration, the cultural, including religious differences, whatever development project cannot really be either working or sustainable. I myself have worked mainly, of course, in China since the late 70s, but lots of job together with the UNDP, with the World Bank, with UNICEF, UNESCO, etc. in different types of the communities, regions, even within one country like China. Of course, China is too big, but even within one country, you saw lots of different priorities, challenges, and problems. But again, with whatever differences, I think it's crucial to have a common or shared, I would rather say, a shared knowledge, shared vision, and therefore shared approaches to those challenges and problems. And even sometimes for development agencies, either international, multinational, or national or local, we worked more on development issues. But back to the first point, I think it's really, really crucial, not only for regions like Middle East or this part of the world 10, 20 years ago, and even still nowadays, that is how to make sure is such base for peace, for order, for rule of law. Therefore, we can gradually sometimes work out a development schedule. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much, and great to have a director of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences here with us, with very pertinent words, linking the focus on education we heard throughout to some of the other important sectors to address. It's not just about quantity, it's about the quality, so it's not just about the money, but very much about as to what we're discussing here today. And of course, the Sustainable Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Agenda is with us throughout. And as Sustainable Development, we're all developing. So this sort of bridges the gap. And with that, I'm very keen to hear now from Director Tefera from the Institute of African Studies from Slovenia. Again, thanks for your patience, but you have the second last intervention, and very good to hear from you here, Tefera. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I think those who are busy with SMS and texts and pictures, I seek your physical and spiritual presence so that you promote. We are here based on purpose. Therefore, I think for self-reflection, at this age of mine, I think it's good to have a sharp mind and mentally attentive. Thank you. Yeah. Let me thank you, the Ministry of, or rather the government of Croatia and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Croatia, the Minister, Her Excellency, Madam Vesna Pusic, and the Vice Minister, who is also here, Vesna, and Madam Kos, then the Director of Directorate for International Relations, our colleague and friend, Madame Nathalie, over there. Thank you for inviting us and inviting me. That's why I'm here. Your Excellencies, ambassadors, NGO representatives, representatives of the FAZE community, the military, and the civil society, and at last my fellow Africans who traveled so far to come and attend it, or those like me who are somewhere staying in Europe and just took this as a place to live. I think when it comes to development, as you said, development cooperation, I'm in this side for some years. We are doing some sort of advocacy, and in sometimes we, on our own right, joined some think tank groups. And what we do, just to give you an information, is that the institute, we are a research-based institute, and at the same time, because the new neoliberal doctrine gave us that, you know, we survive based on projects, yeah. So the nation also works on projects. When the project is over, nobody knows how to, you know, it's another area. Therefore, we are doing also on intercultural interface dialogue and environmental and climate change, and in many cases on advocacy. I think when we discuss development aid, we had one time, I think sometime at the OECD, we said co-development, because when you develop others, you also develop yourself. It's like in life. When you teach, you learn. When you learn, you teach. Nothing is just one side. Two has to tango. And the notion, you know, it is not this time, it's just for, as they said, food for thought, yeah? Let me just begin with the creation of actually development aid. After the Second World War, it was Europeans through the Marshall Fund, meant for Germany to reconstruct Europe, and UNICEF also to support the war-torn European refugees and others created. But soon after that, it has been transformed to others, dividing the world, the dichotomy or dichotomy, that the North or us and them, the developed and the underdeveloped. And that time there was no political correctness. It has been said, the third world. What a terminology. Then in that time, the British, I think in 1961, if I'm not mistaken, they created our overseas colonial regions to cooperate or to integrate or to civilize them or to develop. So now I ask, actually, what is development? What? The ability to eat 3 times, yes, I think it is okay. The spiritual power, and I'm glad here the faith leaders are here, who have also, in some cases, this time have been questioned whether religion, even at that time, gives the freedom to exploit others or encourage, or does it generate within its own teaching the us and them. That's just within the religion. Therefore, after the Second World War, Africa and other countries, other than developed or somehow industrialized states, it has been as the South. Later on came like the word the South. So just to answer on that, now when we're discussing Croatia has been or qualified or assumed like a small and a new development donor or a new actor. I think we're sitting here in this lovely place, Dubrovnik. Its existence witnessed how old it is, and so Croatia cannot be new. Actually, it has been through years cooperating with, in that time, with the third world or with the South countries, has been educating, giving knowledge at its faculty in Zagreb, and during the heydays of the non-aligned movement, it has contributed so much. And I personally, also the intellectuals, many, but among them just one, what I have been discussing, like Augustinčić, yeah, who had contributed to Ethiopia, for example, to draw after the fascism or Italian attack in Ethiopia. The Croatian cultural experts have been contributing that one to Ethiopia. Therefore, always there was a give and take. And Africa by itself also during the wars in Europe has supported European either refugees or the Alexandrinka, if you know, people migrating from this side of Europe to go to Egypt and Africa and survive, things like that. Therefore, this is just that. But the idea why I'm mentioning is that the notion of us and them, the development or the development aid created in the mind gap that I still, or my daughters or my son might keep on paying, because it created a mind gap that the wealthy and other things and the others, which is a racist notion. Then the second one was, of course, after the, just want to mention one, our sister from the missionaries in Haiti has been saying how poor the nation is. In that case, you know, it is good to, yes, when we discuss the existing status of nations, I think it is good to bring it within perspective. Haiti is poor because it managed, it dared to get out of colonialism by winning, defeating not only European forces, Napoleon forces. Napoleon was never, he was never been defeated in Waterloo, but the first defeat was in Haiti. Therefore, after that, there was a collective anti-freedom fighters movement, and then Haiti had to pay 200 billion to the countries which they wanted. Therefore, the consequence of bad decisions, why I mentioned that, lesson learned, what will be the solution? Unless we take it, I think, from the roots within the cause and effect, it cannot serve us. It will be just lip service. Therefore, I think it's good to give sometimes not by Her Excellency, but also by researchers. Then the second one, the second region was the existing state of cooperation, which I'm glad that the chairman, Mr. Marcus, Europe Aid is providing for the world, great Europe. I'm a very optimistic person. The contribution Europe has given, more than 56 billion almost per year across the globe, has helped to bring, to help or to alleviate poverty, to help new schools and universities in different parts. But that doesn't mean that it shouldn't have some critics. For example, the EPA, or the whole EPA, the Economic Partnership Agreement, it has been moving across other countries to get to demanding tariff-free import items. By doing so, some countries were resisting, because if they lose taxation system, the amount of money that could have been collected from tax, the European Commission or Europe sees, no, we will give that one as aid, but materials or items can go in. Therefore, by doing so, it ended up like a nation surviving on a project. Therefore, that one was, I know that there is a lot of improvement and things are going in the right direction. Then the other one, the EDF, the European Development Fund for budget support and other things.
So in that case, yeah. I just hate to interrupt you, but I owe it also to Professor Igor Batistić that he would have a few minutes before the Vice Minister comes. So if I can just give you a minute or two to wrap up your thoughts, and then I need to pass on to
okay, I will keep my critics to the Europe Aid, but anyway. Good government, no, therefore...
you can also have a very quick critic to the Europe Aid. I'm open to that.
What will be the third one is, what is the future challenge? The future challenge, I think, it will be, as they said, the intercultural dialogue, and also the ability to fight racism. We cannot create an inclusive society if it is not predefined, or if it is a new movement, a new approach from the policy development and from local practical implementation. Then the other one was on migration. Migrants, Europe has been made, unmade, remade by migrants since time began. St. Peter brought enlighteners from other parts to Vatican. The contribution. Yes, there can be challenges in different areas, but at the same time, it should not be doomed or seen as only a threat. It can be, but since time began, they bring also a value added. And it's good also to address the causes and effects. What are the pull factors, the reasons, the root factors of migration, which European Commission has in many cases an advantage of through the aid, can adjust it by dealing with those countries which generate more migrants. Therefore, as a butterfly, as once Kofi Annan said, butterfly effect, you know, somewhere that happened bad will touch other countries. No country is an island, no person is an island, so that no migrant is an illegal. Every people have the right to go, to move and here and there, because that's how the world belongs to us. The future, the future we want to build has to be dealt not only by 6-7 months, but 7 minutes, but also like now in the Addis Ababa dialogue, in the United Nations dialogue, at the European Commission, and the European Commission is supporting so much money for the civil society dialogue or bringing ideas in different countries. Therefore, I thank you very much. The other one, I think, we shall discuss it. But just to say, the ethnic cleansing, and
I need to give the floor to your last colleague. We can come back, hopefully, to some of the issues.
No, I think I have finished. Okay, I have finished. Thank you very much. I think it's good. Yeah, thank you for having so much the composition of this different perspective.
Yeah. And if you want to preach inclusiveness, just as a moderator, I feel responsible to make sure that Professor Igor Pelliceri gets a word. Happy to come back to the economic partnership agreements on Africa, an important subject indeed on the new relationship we tried to have between Europe and Africa, with a lot of pros and cons. And I fully subscribe, I mean, your plea that migration is something which will stay for us for decades, and we should accept that this is a natural cause of life and have a very different attitude. I could not agree more on that. And with that, Professore, grazie.
Grazie a lei. So, 10 minutes, I promise. A totally different speech than I thought. I also want to thank the organizers and the chairperson for bringing up the Commission's experience in coordinating so many different voices. I think I have to be outspoken here. I entered a different phase of my life. Maybe when I was involved in the implementation of projects, I should have been more careful, but now I entered into the phase in which I'm analyzing the whole thing, trying to understand if it makes sense. So 3 things I would like just you to say. I mean, I know you're all tired. First, about aid. What is actually aid? The prejudice on aid. Second, corruption. And third, research. These are just 3 abstracts of what I could say on the topics, but let's start from this. It took us decades to accept that political parties are not just carrying values, but also interests. How it comes that when we talk about aid, we can't accept ad simpliciter that aid is a political tool, especially when it falls into the hand of a state donor. It's part of its foreign policy. Now, which doesn't mean that those, like some of you who are implementing the aid, don't do it motivated by the hardest values and opinions, whatever they come from the religious motivations or not. But, I mean, would we approach any kind of policy analysis, policy matter analysis in the same way? Probably not if we were talking about health. But health is also, motivated, related to, the wealth of the patient. The people have to live, that can also be treated through a moral approach, but it should also be treated, in my view, as for what it is, which means why a donor makes a donation is much less analyzed than what is the need that the donor is going to cover. This second part of the sentence is much more analyzed than the first one. Now, this kind of takes the research away from some of the main evident conclusions, I mean, at least statistically. First, that aid is an instrument of foreign policy, that it has becoming an increasingly stronger element of foreign policy instead of trade and war when it comes to relationships among states. Second, states always do have stronger motivations, state donors, than state recipients. That's why state recipients try to become state donors as soon as they can. Third, donors coordination, in fact, is an objective, but it's at this current stage more a rhetoric. We have more donors competition because states do go there where they have a geopolitical interest, and we cannot expect anything else than a competition for that. Again, I'm not criticizing that. I'm just saying that it's a part of a policies among states do compete in domestic as international spheres, so that we should at least put that into the matrix. So even think about the definition foreign aid. That's out of date. What is foreign? What comes from abroad, which means that we always had a perspective of the beneficiary, of the recipient. But if I go through a donor, I would not call the aid I do somewhere else foreign. I would call it international. That's why we talk about international law. We don't talk about foreign law. Okay, and last thing on this first point is the subject of transaction. I like this forum. I must say I'm it's omnicomprehensive, but I'm half Italian, half Croatian, so I'm used to this. But I would like to say that is ODA, the Official Development Assistance, still worth as a definition of what aid is? Can't we, or shouldn't we consider aid relationship wherever we have a donor and a recipient? And regardless the subject of transaction, can we call energy? The first day of this forum actually showed that. Is energy also a form of transaction, therefore of aid? Is weapon? Is military technology? Is economy? Did what happened with Greece, we will not call that aid, or how we do define that? Second aspect, corruption. Okay, I like hearing this, but you know what? I think that this is one of the mantras going on through decades. We have to fight corruption on projects. Let me tell you one thing. In my short experience, I've seen much more ineffective projects than corrupted projects. Of course, corruption is a problem. But this mantra of the fight against corruption often becomes a way to put in the second level the fight against ineffectiveness of the projects. In the last 20 years, projects have taken over the subjects. Things are done more through projects than by subjects. So this idea that any action that can be systemized into a log frame, it fits into a log frame, it means it's good. I would like to quote Nike here, but say just do it. Sometimes it's better through a subject than try to systemize it into a log frame in order to do it in a project. The most redundant project I've seen, I'm not saying corrupted, but most redundant projects I've seen are those promoting anti-corruption through projects. You don't, in Italy, if you have any kind of corruption problem, you would go to a court. You don't go through a project, if you know what I mean. And this applies mainly, I'm sorry, we are playing with words here, but we're talking now mainly of the countries which we help. We talk about developments. We are helping countries which are already developed. So how do you, we use the word of the technical assistance, but how do you actually help somebody who is already developed? We are facing now these particular cases. I mean, it started with the fall of the Berlin Wall. Okay, sorry, I just, so Yugoslavia, the collapse of Yugoslavia and the collapse of the Soviets showed that we had to help, finally, for the first time in the history, somebody who was actually already developed. How do you do that? How do you justify that? So, you know, Gordon, your problem are not the big NGOs. Your problem are the consulting companies, and I can tell you about that later during the coffee break. For the Commission, I'm here because of the job you gave me. But I have to tell you, one of the reasons why I left, I was tired of doing project implementation, was simply because I was tired to be considered an instrument, and that my political potential was not anyway, there was no transmission channel. There is no transmission channel at the level of delegation between operations sections, contract and finance, and the political sections. There is no transmission channel between a head of delegation and Brussels, and the deconcentration process has been lived mainly in the implementation of the programs. I've been talking about Europe Aid only because I had the honor mainly to work for you, but this has been caused generally an internal fight of elites, can we call it like this, which being the European Commission quite a democratic organization, this has been rather consuming, I would say. Third, how to improve research? Well, first, access to data. I mean, I'm trying to access Chris, the informatics system, and I had easier access to that when I was team leader of a large project, rather than now that I'm just doing research, so I should have no other interest than that. You have no research if you don't have access to data. Second, you have no research if you don't have institutional memory. How many of you have seen catastrophic projects replicated, sometimes even if the same title in the neighboring country, not even the region? And this goes over and over for all the organizations, I'm sorry, at bilateral and multilateral level. And third, transparency. We are so much obsessed about, you mentioned correctly, sir, before the auditors, but we're so much obsessed by the corruption that in the Commission environment we follow more again, we're just going for the big inefficiency, which is called corruption. We do not go for the ineffectiveness. So we should have less Olafs and more really independent evaluators. And when I call independent evaluators, according to the Max Weber, the independent evaluator is the one who makes the evaluation and is paid by somebody else who is not the evaluated. And fourth, and I conclude here really, education. How many of you had even a couple of hours of intensive course of what you're doing right now? Nobody. So today we are finding we're not a group, we are not a community. We are united by the topics, but we're not united by the knowledge. And the dishomogeneity of our speeches today demonstrates this. I'm teaching international aid, and I became professor of contemporary history. And most of the time, I have to explain to my students, you know what, I'm not a historian, sorry. Just, sooner or later, we have to do this. We have to approach this education matter. Thank you.
No, thanks a lot. Professor. Igor, that was an interesting end. I also realize the Vice Minister is already here in the room, but I'm told he's patient and we can wrap this up. I'm not sure if there's some immediate cross-referencing. Maybe I'll come back to the last two speakers. On your own case, of course, we know the frustration of external experts working with us, a large machinery of the European Commission. Happy to come back and update you on what we're trying to do currently to rectify that. And also on the historic discourse of Mr. Tefera, it's very relevant to today because the European Commission at the very outset, in fact, had indeed sort of a decolonization agenda. The creation of the European Development Fund, which is still the fund we have available for Africa, is at the outset, 1957, was meant to accompany the decolonization process of the then 4 out of the 6 member states. And what I find enormously enriching, and I think the conference here reconfirms this, that there is no continuity, as far as I see, between the current European Union, where half of our member states have gone through areas of captivity, of being subjugated to external powers in different views. I heard that very prominently from the current Latvian presidency, articulating of what it took from them only in a generation to transform from captivity to running a successful EU presidency and having joined the Euro 2 years ago. So we benefit enormously from that impulse, and whether we address that to our partners, We are not the continuum of the former decolonizing member states. We are sort of an entity of its own, enormously enriched by the more recent reform efforts and transformation processes. And I think a lot of what is also still happening here on the Balkan is relevant to that. On the point of, yes, less Olafs, for those less familiar with our acronyms, this is the anti-fraud organ of the European Union. There's also the European Court of Auditors. And they, of course, hammer us down on accountancy rather than accountability on results. So this is, of course, the dichotomy in which we operate. But I would welcome you not to give up on what is actually a very rich and increasing reference material of external evaluations we are running. The European Union, I mentioned recently, one done jointly with the World Bank on Uganda. There's a very interesting one on conflict and crisis. There are some interesting ones on civil society organizations, and a very recent one on gender, by the way, since this has been a cross-cutting theme. We have recently published a general evaluation on gender, just ahead of reintroducing a gender communication, which should be a part and parcel of our discussion within the European Union in 2015. I would also like to come back to the for me, the Sustainable Development Goal agenda is part of what you were referring to, of this old-fashioned, I fully agree, old-fashioned framework. It also includes a bit the way the DAC committee and ODA is currently structured, and picking up on what we heard from our Chinese colleague, that indeed, if we look at sustainable development, we are all developing. There's not a single nation which can claim that they are running their business on a sustainable development agenda. So we are really just in front of a new mindset. And a lot of that, as I say, has been echoed from many very practical questions. I don't know really, I'm a bit in your hands. I mean, I have to apologize, I failed dismally as a moderator because it was just not possible to allow time for a second round. I would have liked each and every one to come back to some of the points you have raised. But I'm sure that both Natalie, who has put this together, and Puljević have taken good notes of the many good points raised. I myself, I did two things. I mean, I used 2 pens in the course of this discussion to scribble down the many good aspects I did hear from each of the speakers. But then I've also tried to structure some of the main points against the 4 question marks we were given from the organizers. I mean, the broader issue of lessons learned on conflict prevention, the broader issues of what we need to look at on transformation. There was the issue, thirdly, of sort of accountability and sensitivity of development assistance, and lastly, the monitoring and evaluation framework. And if we still have a few minutes, I'm happy to leave with the Minister a few of the main points, which broadly had one big common thread, the unfinished business of inclusiveness, very much linked also to the human dialogue and the need to listen to individual stakeholders, be they the beneficiary or be they, as we have heard impressively on some of the legislative work, being the ones who can feed in experience into the way public institutions are being run. I thought it was useful that we were reminded on inclusiveness that, of course, the gender on many aspects does stand out as a prisma of entry, but also that we should look at war victims, notably the sexual violence, but also child soldiers as a specific area of concern, and then children more generally, and link all of the 3 back as much as possible into early opportunities, rather than having them as sort of victims or marginalized groups of society. Throughout the discourse also we have reconfirmed that small remains beautiful. That's the title of an old-fashioned book of development, but small both as donor and as a public entity, but also small as an activity which can continue to make a difference. We were given very interesting links, I think, on the role of private sector. We heard a few of you intervening on the value of public-private partnership. So the private sector as a body of public initiative, but it was also very well linked to the possibility to have governance injected into that. The corporate social responsibility, one or two of you mentioned, but also sort of the fiduciary aspect which came through in your intervention. But also we should register the peace bridging capacity of businesses reaching out to their neighbors, be they through projects and joint initiatives and investments, or be it through hearing from linking chambers. There was another sort of strong common thread, which was, I think, well put together between the humanitarian aspect, development aspect, and the security and the military aspect. And on linking the humanitarian assistance with development, we heard of the QIPs, the quick impact projects, but also the 4 Ps we were left, or 4 Rs, sorry, we were left here in the agenda. And the link to security and military, and also agreeing that the military is not just seen as an actor outside of aid, but can also be a very useful and prominent deliverer of development aspects. Now, on the broader issue of still on conflict prevention, what I certainly noticed, the very good clarification that this is not just post-crisis, but also we have to at the same look at the of natural disasters and industrial downsizing as an activity needing to address. Some of you mentioned loss of opportunities of reacting too late, be it at the international level or be it at local level. I will not repeat the daunting figures we gave them of the tens of millions of displaced and how much of that is actually still happening in developing countries. But I think I would welcome if UNHCR left your figures and UNICEF with the organizers, so that can be used as a very good reference. On the transformation, again, I've sort of grouped a number of your very good comments under that aspect, starting off with, does experience evaporate? I like that. But I also liked how a number of intervenants could pick this up on how to institutionalize experience into knowledge, be it through UNDP type projects we have heard, or be it through the academia. On transformation, we cannot but conclude that if we're serious to turn around societies, that the focus has to be on young people. I mean, the examples we heard from Iraq and Afghanistan are striking, but similarly, the work done by UNICEF in Turkey, refugees within Turkey, are very good examples. Good examples also were the ones I found where women in peace and security do come in and, in fact, prominently. And for me, certainly, also, I'm taking forward that East-East cooperation has a lot of value. And within that, I think also Croatia's experience of federating much of that is something we need to register very prominently. And, well, Leslie's gone, but she sort of did a passionate plea that kids as agents of change should not be undervalued. On the broader issue of accountability and sensitivity, Croatia's experience as a former recipient turning sort of EU donor is something which is relevant and pertinent, including, as you said, on the area of accountability and the value added of sort of grant euros having to be forked out for some abstract ODA commitments, and that for that the value of projects, and including continued value of smaller projects, is important. I've noted here again down the 4 R's we have heard on the way projects can be designed. the return of investment on children, and then the fiduciary capacity, the World Bank, I think you were the one who put most emphasis on that, is something which should register. On monitoring, maybe there was less than I had expected in terms of comments, but we, I think, can take at least three aspects forward. The one is, data, of course, is essential. And within data, the disaggregated data. So the big headline stories don't help the operational aspects. We had the emphasis of child rights monitoring and in research. And then we were referred back to the new Sustainable Development Goals coming forward with a very good set of new indicators, hopefully doing what many of you actually argue that we need to be better in targeting our assistance, avoiding the type of duplication and waste we have heard from Haiti. All through that was very much supported, and I would like to give a specific thanks to the three sort of religious voices and that of Gordon from civil society on not being oblivious to what it takes to construct the fabric of society and the role religious communities do play both as a partner of states, but also in rolling out and showing and leading by example, and civil society both as an advocate for a better world, but also as an important voice of public accountability. This is just a snapshot of many of the things which I take away from a very rich discussion. Vesna was right, 3 hours is nothing. Absolutely. So for me, that was three very short hours. Again, apologies for that. It was not possible to condense that further and to allow for a further round of cross exchange. But we're still being hosted here in Dubrovnik. So I hope in going out of that meeting, not only will I have an opportunity to come back to more of the nitty-gritty of some of Eurobaid's way of doing business, but also some of the larger, very good elements. So with that, many thanks again to the organizers. Many thanks for you for a very disciplined participation. For me, this has been a very rich morning, a pleasure to be here, and an honor now to pass the floor to the Deputy Minister of Foreign and European Affairs of the Republic of Croatia, Mr. Joško Klisović.
Dame i gospodo, učesnici Croatia foruma, svi vi koji ste imali snage, interesa, želje i volje saslušati ove konstruktivne i kvalitetne rasprave do samoga kraja. Evo, još jedan Croatia forum ide svome kraju. Ja mislim da smo i ovaj puta, kao i svaki do sada, uspjeli sa ciljem i svrhom zbog čega smo i organizirali ovaj forum. Osigurali smo jedno mjesto na kojem možemo raspraviti, razmijeniti ideje, približiti stajališta. Osigurali smo mjesto na koje su došli ovaj puta ljudi sa raznih kontinenata. Čuli smo perspektivu o razvojnoj politici sa raznih točaka različitog dijela spektra. I to je jedna velika vrijednost koju smo imali. Jer kao što je kazao gospodin Herić, ako se ne dogovaramo, onda to vodi samo ka strahu međusobno. A strah nas vodi ka iracionalnim odlukama. Strah nas vodi k tome da ne znamo kako ćemo dalje u našoj budućnosti. Vodi nas ka mržnji, vodi nas ka zatvaranju u vlastite toreve, bilo da su to nacionalni, vjerski, religijski, bilo kakvi. Ali vodi nas tamo gdje nema tolerancije. Upravo suprotnom mjestu onome koje nam svodi razvojna agenda. Ja vjerujem da smo ovdje na našim panelima uspjeli iskristalizirati i neke poruke. Poruke koje će se trebati jasno čuti sljedeći tjedan u Addis Abebi, na velikoj konferenciji UN-ovoj. Poruke koje naši lideri moraju čuti kada budu sjeli zajedno u New Yorku u rujnu i kodificirali ono što smo mi ovdje na neki način doprinijeli kroz jasne naše poruke. A od samog početka smo čuli, od samog uvoda i otvaranja, kao i kroz sve panele, da je razvojna agenda i razvojna politika puno šira od onog uskog segmenta na koji se obično misli na 3 temeljne komponente gospodarstva, okoliša i ljudskih prava. Ona uključuje praktički sve javne politike u sebi ako želi biti održiva, ako želi biti dugoročna, ako želi usrećiti ljude kojima je potrebna, a potrebna nam je svima. Čuli smo da sigurnost je važna, da je imigracijska politika važna, da je okolišna politika važna, prevencija sukoba da je važna, mnoge javne politike da su važne. Naravno da jesmo. Nije niti jedan panel prošao, a da nije neki od panelista kazao da bez sigurnosti, bez osjećaja osobne sigurnosti i ukupne društvene sigurnosti nema niti razvoja, nema stabilnosti. Možete upumpavati novac, možete imati projekte, možete imati aktivnosti, ali rezultata nećete imati. Pa tome svjedoči naravno i ovaj događaj koji se danas obilježava u Srebrenici. Ne ponovilo se. Bez poštivanja ljudskih prava, bez poštivanja demokracije, bez poštivanja digniteta osobe, svake ponaosob i pojedinačno, nema ni razvoja. Nema razvoja niti jedne vrste. I zato da, trebamo se dogovarati. Zato da, trebamo ubijati strahove, jačati povjerenje. I zato da, ne smijemo dovoditi do mržnje koja nas može odvesti tamo gdje ne želimo. Ne smijemo se zatvarati, moramo se otvarati. Otvarati jedni prema drugima. Ali nećemo jednako tako niti tolerirati tendencije koje nas opet guraju u krivom smjeru o kojima je govorila gospođa Sanja Tobaković. Nikakva fašizacija neće proći. Niti u našoj zemlji, niti u Europi, a vjerujem niti nigdje u svijetu. Jer ona je opet negacija razvojne agende. Negacija digniteta čovjeka, negacija ljudskih prava, negacija onoga što nas čini ljudima i zbog čega živimo. No ovo današnji naš skup i jučerašnji nije samo iznio na svjetlo dana vezu između vanjske politike i razvojne agende. Iznio je vezu između unutarnje politike i razvojne agende. U svim državama, pa i Europske unije, uključujući i Hrvatske, imate povike da li nama treba tolike novce slati negdje daleko, kad nam treba i samima ovdje da se razvijamo. Dakle, rad sa vlastitom javnošću. Naravno da treba, jer nama svima će biti bolje ako ujednačimo život u svim dijelovima svijeta. Ako ujednačimo poštivanje ljudskih prava, manjinskih prava, prava vulnerable groups. Ako svi budemo vjerovali u slične iste vrijednosti koje nas guraju u svjetliju budućnost, onda naravno da, naš je zadatak da tome doprinesemo, da tome pomognemo kako god možemo. I to ćemo mi u Hrvatskoj sigurno predano činiti. Išli smo dalje i kroz panele i shvatili smo u drugom i trećem panelu da možda postoje, kad se gleda kroz brojeve, veliki ili mali donatori, ali u načelu postoje samo donatori koji nastupaju u dobroj vjeri i oni koji nastupaju u lošoj vjeri. Isto to vrijedi i za primatelje pomoći. I da, pomoć je međunarodna, nije foreign assistance, nije strana pomoć, jer radimo u partnerstvu. Ako partnerstva nema, ako razumijevanja nema, naši ciljevi neće biti ispunjeni. I to je potpuno jasno. Govorili smo malo prije i o sigurnosti. Ukoliko ne osiguramo jednu jasnu, kvalitetnu perspektivu ljudima, pa naravno da su oni u strahu i naravno da su podložni manipulaciji i naravno da idu prema radikalnim pokretima koji im daju neki umjetni osjećaj digniteta i važnosti. Naravno da se hoćemo boriti protiv toga i razvojna agenda je jedan od važnih instrumenata naše politike u borbi protiv toga. Borbi za stabilnije i kvalitetnije društvo. I to moramo raditi dakle u partnerstvu. Moramo raditi na način da međusobno razgovaramo, komuniciramo, utvrđujemo potrebe. Što je to stvarno potrebno u pojedinoj zemlji? Imati jedan individualizirani, tailor-made approach prema svakome. Shvatiti svaku sredinu, shvatiti njezine probleme i vidjeti kako najbolje uskladiti sa održivim razvojem. Jer to je naš cilj. Pomoći svakom na najbolji način koji će ljudi koji dobivaju pomoć i osjetiti. I oni ju ne dobijaju. Oni su samo dio partnerskog odnosa. Odnosa u kojem svako pruža nešto. I zato jedna koordinacija između svih nas u lancu je izuzetno važna. I kad kažem svih nas u lancu, ne mislim samo na države davatelje i države primatelje razvojne pomoći. Mislim na sve dionike koji sudjeluju, sve stakeholdere, kako se kaže, sve vas ovdje oko ovog stola koji ste predstavili različite segmente društva. Bez svih vas skupa nema uspjeha u našem poslu. a želimo ostvariti kvalitetan rezultat za naše bolje sutra, za našu bolju budućnost. I ono što mi je posebno drago i što je dio hrvatske vanjske politike, drago mi je da se u mnogim panelima od mnogih panelista moglo čuti da nema održivog razvoja bez aktivnog i angažiranog, predanog sudjelovanja žena u razvojnoj agendi. Ja se s time u potpunosti slažem i mislim ako su žene u stanju brinuti jednako tako angažirano i predano o obitelji, da onda jednako tako će biti kvalitetan doprinos njihov ukupnom društvenom razvoju. Bez više od 50% ljudi koji žive na zemlji nema kvalitetnog razvoja. I zato, naravno, treba ulagati u edukaciju djevojčica i žena, u njihovu ekonomsku samostalnost, u sve ono što je potrebno da im se pruži i otvori prostor u društvu, da doprinesu svojim angažmanom boljoj budućnosti. Sa ženama će nam sigurno angažiranima biti bolje društvo, bit će nam bolji i kvalitetniji životi. Evo, toliko od mene, par završnih još stvari kao ključne poruke koje želim da svi ponesemo odavde. Razvojna agenda nema alternativu. Alternativa je samo sukob, alternativa su radikalni pokreti, alternativa je kršenje ljudskih i manjinskih prava. To je ono što mi ne želimo. Svi u našim sredinama moramo raditi na razumijevanju održive razvojne agende među svojim građanima, u svojim sredinama, kao i međunarodno, međusobno kada se nađemo na različitim mjestima. Pođimo sa takvim porukama kući, pođimo sretni, pođimo spremni i dalje doprinositi ovoj važnoj međunarodnoj i nacionalnoj politici u ime naše budućnosti, u ime naše djece. I prije nego što završim do kraja, želio bih zahvaliti onima koji su omogućili da se ovaj događaj ovdje u Dubrovniku desi. A to je prvenstveno našoj upravi u Ministarstvu vanjskih i europskih poslova za multilateralu na čelu sa gospođom Vesnom Batistić-Kos, našem sektoru za razvojnu pomoć na čelu sa Natali Lulić-Grozdanović i svim vašim djelatnicima koji su dugotrajno i predano više od 6 mjeseci radili na ovom događaju da omoguće ovu razmjenu ovih ideja, da omoguće približavanje stavova i moguće kodificiranje tih stavova u međunarodnim dokumentima. Zahvalio bi našem protokolu koji je stvarno brinuo se o nama svima i omogućio da sa zadovoljstvom radimo i sudjelujemo u ovom radu kroz ova 3 dana. Veliko hvala ide naravno i liaison officerima koji su činili, ja vjerujem u pojedinim situacijama i čuda kako bi svima vama s kojima su radili omogućili da funkcionirate na najbolji mogući način. Svima vama veliko hvala kao i našim prevoditeljima koji su omogućili nama da u vlastitoj zemlji govorimo i svoj jezik. Evo, ja bih vas pozvao sve skupa na jedan veliki aplauz za sve one koji su sudjelovali u organizaciji kao i na one koji su doprinijeli diskusiji tijekom našeg Croatia Summita. Hvala lijepo. I ovime proglašavam summit zatvorenim i proglašavam vrijeme za uživanje u Dubrovniku. Hvala lijepo.